Health. Could I get you to amend your motion to a specific date?
Sure. What date that would be preferred?
We could do either the June or the July regular meeting. I'm not sure the exact date. It would be the second Tuesday.
The 10th.
June 10th?
What about, I'm at C in June. What about
I will be on in June, too.
All right. July?
Yep. What's July?
I believe it's July 8th. July 8th is.
Okay.
Not back in that one. It's 12.
It's like June 10th or July 8th.
Why don't we we'll shoot for June 10th? So, you have the amended motion?
Oh, yeah, right. Okay, so I move we continue that application to June 10th.
Second. Motion is amended by Andy, seconded by Doug. Any more discussion? All in favor?
All right.
Opposed? Abstain? No one. 3-1, motion carries.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to ZBA 25-002, 120 Watchog Road, LLC, Summers, appeal of a decision of zoning enforcement officer that proposed manure lagoon as a farm pond is an agricultural use as of right. Now, before we get going on this, first I want to thank everybody showing up tonight. Appreciate it. On this particular matter, the zoning, we have Ralph Williams here, so that's okay. On behalf of the zoning enforcement officer, Carl Landolino will be the town attorney for her, and Mike Zitka will be the attorney for the board. The Zoning Board of Appeals, regardless of what you, and please correct me, board members or Attorney Zitka if I'm wrong, regardless of what you may have heard or read in the paper or saw online or talked to somebody about, the ZBA does not have the legal authority to either approve or deny this use. Okay, the only thing we're going to be here for tonight is to determine, is this proposed manure lagoon a farm pond or is it not? And that's what we're focusing on and nothing else. So you keep in mind, whether you're for or against, when you're going to comment, keep your comments limited to that particular genre, because we're not going to be going off on all kinds of other things. That's the specific item that we're legally entitled to act upon tonight, and that's all we'll be discussing.
Can you repeat that again?
Pardon?
Just repeat it. A little hard of hearing.
We will only be acting upon, we do not have the legal authority to approve or deny this use. The only thing we'll be acting upon tonight is the decision that the proposed manure lagoon is a farm pond as an agricultural use of right. Is it or is it not? And that's it. Very specific. That's all we have the legal authority to do. So, you know, people have time to recalibrate their comments if they should be for or against. I would ask that you would please respect when we get to public comment, please be respectful. No insults, okay? Try and keep your comments as concise as possible. Keep them on task and to the subject. If you somebody has spoken to the issue that you wish to speak to, but you want to be on the record, please take note of that person's name, okay, and say that you concur with subject X, okay, the person and their issue, so that we're not saying the same thing 100 times. That would be appreciated, just in the interest of time. And I do reserve the right at some point to limit the amount of time for speakers, but we'll take that as it goes. Just be respectful, and I would appreciate that. Is there any correspondence, Jen, that needs to be read before we get to the parties?
Well, this is public comment. Do you want to wait till you open the floor for public comment?
Sure, that's fine. Okay, well, let's get started. I do believe that, Jen, that you would want to explain your decision first. Give us some background there.
One quick question.
Am I talking? Did you start taking?
If you would be so kind as to take minutes, Ralph. I did the roll call.
I was simply asking whether because I am the secretary of the board.
Mic on, please.
I did push the
Light on your
button.
microphone.
Yep. Got to bring it real close.
Okay, I guess so. I only asked one of the other members of the board, since I am the secretary, whether they had begun taking the minutes, so that I can now start.
Yes, if you'd be so kind, Ralph, I would appreciate it. Jen, Carl?
Mr. Chairman, for the record, Carl Landolina, I've spoken to your counsel, Mr. Ziska. He had proposed a different sort of agenda, allowing the appellant to go first. I'll do whatever the board wishes me to do. So,
That's fine. Is the board good with that? That's fine.
Mr. Barry.
Let's go. You have the floor.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Dwight Merriam. I'm a lawyer. This is Derek Donnelly, who's my co-counsel. My office is at 80 Latimer Lane in Simsbury, Connecticut. I have a packet of information for you, which I will get now and give to you. I have timed myself on this presentation. If I'm not interrupted, I will get done in 45 to 50 minutes. Set your clocks. For the audience, my apologies for having my back to you. That's the way these rooms are set up, but I'm going to hand around a pad. And anybody that wants my full presentation, which is voluminous, like this big, I will email it to you. Probably not tonight, because we may be here for a while, but I will email it to anybody in the audience that wants it so that you have full access to it. So let me pass that pad around.
What's the definition of a farm pond?
It's not the time for public comment. We'll get to that later.
Thank you.
Our pond has no manure.
I am sorry that there are not seats for everybody here, but that's just the way it goes. This room is entirely full, maybe, how many people? 100, 125, 100, over 100 people, I would say. It's going to be really important for the audience to be as quiet as they can and not talk while I do my presentation. I'm hearing impaired. My hearing aids face out the back. Everything you say, I'm going to hear. You may not want me to hear it. So just if you could not have a conversation while I'm doing my presentation. I have provided the board with a list of the materials they have, and I would ask them to go now to the appellant's presentation, and I'll walk you through it. It is now 6:50. As the chairman said, you really only have one decision to make. Is a 2.9 acre, actually over 7 million gallons, 2.23 million gallons directly of ammonia-filled digestate, storing manure digestate, a, quote, farm pond, irrigation pond, lined irrigation pond, or reservoir, as Oak Ridge Dairy has variously characterized it, and as such, is it a permitted use in the town of Simsbury, town of Somers, pursuant to, I live in Simsbury, town of Somers pursuant to the town zoning regulations? It's not permitted in the town of Simsbury, I'll tell you that. So, there may be a subordinate question.
No comments, please.
There may be a subordinate question for the ZBA if it determines that the manure lagoon is a permitted use, and that is the application is submitted defective, is not in compliance with the regulations, but I leave that to the board's discretion. Page 2. You need to understand something about the manure lagoon so you can decide what it is. If you don't know what it is, at least the basics of it. The chairman's right. This is not a site plan review. This is not a special use permit proceeding. I'm not going to tell you whether this particular manure lagoon should be located in this location or not. We're not going there. But I have to describe for you what it is, because something characteristically different might result in a different answer from this board. I put up a board over there with the proposal. Let me tell you what I can glean from what has been submitted. Remember, the town made a decision that they're not regulating this. They're not looking at it. They haven't reviewed it. They haven't critiqued it. They looked at the basic, you have in your packet a transmittal letter and a one-page plan, and that's it. So it's 2.91 acres. That's an important number. It's just under 3. There's a reason for that. It's 10.5 feet deep. The applicant, Oak Ridge Dairy, claims it's 11.2, but that's an error. We have a report on that. It's 7.43 million gallons. We think it's actually more than that, but we're unable to determine it based on the drawings that are provided. And they claim there's a 1-foot freeboard. What's a freeboard? A freeboard is a space above the top of the liquid, the top of the manure, all right? And it's designed to provide a reserve capacity in case there's an extreme storm event. It's not 1 foot. It's not 12 inches. By our calculations, it's 0.7 feet. But even at 12 inches, it doesn't work, as I'll explain. So that's an important issue as to what this is as compared to a farm pond or any of these other characterizations. Here's where the problem probably lies. There is a general feeling in this state that farm and agricultural uses are just exempt. And you know where that comes from? That comes from the inland wetlands regulations, not zoning. This is the Zoning Board of Appeals. We're talking about zoning. But I put in here on page 2 your wetlands regulations saying that these activities, 3 acres or less, are exempt. I think that's why you come in at 2.91 acres, but I don't know. On page 3, I go through some more details of what this proposal is as we understand it. Again, remembering that the town has not done any engineering review or other review of the proposal. It's clay lime, 2 feet thick. It will be surrounded by a chain link fence because if you fall into it, you are in a serious problem. It's designed by an engineer who's not certified by the Natural Resources Conservation Services as a technical service provider, qualified to design open pit, lined marine manure storage facilities in residential areas which are dependent on groundwater. That's just obvious from the proposal. And the firm that did it, which is a very competent engineering firm, but they are not certified by NRCS to do this. It's 5 feet above groundwater. You'll see that in the record. There's no leakage monitoring system that we can determine from the application. It's an open pit, no containment of odors. Gases will be emitted. That's obvious also from the application. There's no plan for the number, hours of operation, routes of tanker trucks coming to and from the storage facility. There's no performance bond for installation of a public water supply for the neighborhood should their wells be contaminated by a leaking manure lagoon. And there's no system, profoundly, there's no system for monitoring the 30% digestate that they're putting in there. They're saying we're going to do 70%, water, and 30% of this ammonia-laden digestate. It all mixes up together. But that's the application as I understand it. Then I go on page 3 to tell you what manure digestate is. It's what's left over, and Oak Ridge people are here. It's their business, not mine. But here's what it is, and some references to the literature as to how it should be handled. Now, I got a little education on how much manure cows produce because I wanted to know how this facility fits in terms of its size. Again, this is not a critique of whether this is appropriate or not for this site, but it is important to understand how it fits in with Oak Ridge's system, because Oak Ridge will claim, so far as I know, that the so-called 360 rain irrigation system is critical. This is a critical element of it. So you need to understand how this fits in with their larger operation. But the short version on pages 4 and 5 is you get 12 gallons of manure per cow per day. You got 2,800 cows. Go on to the next page, at the bottom of that page, you get about 12.25 million gallons of manure digestate a year. the top of page 5, the volume of this facility, it's a large facility. The volume of this facility is 7.43 million acres. 30% of that's digestate. It gets diluted with other water. Oak Ridge's cows, near as I can figure, produce 6 times that every year. What does that tell us? Remember, if this facility is as of right, requires no local regulation, there's nothing to preclude as a matter of legal precedent the creation of additional 2.9 acre manure lagoons throughout the agricultural fields that are available. Simple as that. So it needs a constant supply of fresh water. And we don't know where that comes from. That's not part of the plan. And there's some discussion there of that. Now this freeboard. So an essential part of this design that needs to be understood as you determine whether this is a farm pond or a reservoir as it has been characterized. So the idea is that this is filled up with manure, has to have a chain link fence around it. It's toxic stuff. People will die if they get into it. So what do you do with a big rainstorm? This is a berm all the way around. That's another thing that's not clear from the plan. It's going to be bermed up all the way around. Rain comes, fills it up. Does it go over the top? Simple calculation. It's not, first of all, it's not 12 inches. Where does the rain come from? It falls on the pond or manure lagoon, as we choose to define it. And the answer is, what happened in Oxford? You remember Oxford, Connecticut, August 2024? 16, 17 inches of rain. Even if this has got 12 inches of freeboard, it creates a hazardous situation. It's part of the design criteria. Now let's go on to page 6 and talk about the decision. I'm going to have to walk you through this, and Carl Landolina and Jen Roy can discuss more how this evolved, but I'm going to ask you to, because it's in reverse chronological order, to walk backwards through my presentation with me. Page 10. This is how the colloquy started between Oak Ridge Dairy and Jen Roy. Okay, that's the end of an email. Go back, page 9. I'm not going to read all this to you. Back on page 8, on March 25th, Bree, is that how you pronounce it? Is it Bree or Bry?
Bree.
Bree, oh, thank you. Bree Hyde wrote to Jen Roy and summarized what this was all about. And I'll leave that to your reading, but I do address some of what's said in here in a moment. Then, looking up the page, Jen Roy replies, well, thank you for that information. I got to talk to Carl about it. Makes sense. Because they're asking for no regulation, no permit, no review, nothing. Just, we'll get digging tomorrow. So then, Carl Landolina writes back to Jen Roy, I can't see any issues with letting the excavation go forward at this point, close quote. Jen Roy writes back to Carl Landolina, oh, okay, this is to be considered agricultural and no permits or approval needed? And Carl Landolina answers, yes, that is correct. How did this happen? Something that we are telling you was wrong, because these are competent, good people. And how did this happen? How did they make that mistake? Well, number one is this myth that because of the wetlands exemption, that everything else is exempt. Number two, they really didn't have complete information on what the proposal was. If you look everything that Oak Ridge gave them, there's nothing, as I will tell you in a moment, in any of the state or federal plans for Oak Ridge Dairy that calls for a manure lagoon in summers, calls for the trucking. Over 1,400 trailer trucks a year in and out of that neighborhood, articulated trailer trucks of digestate. Nothing about that is in the plan. Please. And so they didn't have complete information. And I'm not surprised that they got where they went. But it's wrong where they went, because they didn't have complete information. They assumed that everything was exempt like most people do, even those of us in the business. And the third thing was, it wasn't until I spent an enormous amount of time, I got to tell you, going through the zoning regulations, using word searching for every word that I could find in the regulations and pulling all the pieces together that shows a picture that's evident that the zoning commission never intended a 2.91 acre, 7.4 million gallon open manure storage pit as a matter of right anywhere in the town. Let me go on to page, where am I, 11? Oh, I'm going faster than I thought I was going. So, page 11. The question of the day, why a manure lagoon is not a permitted use anywhere in Somers. This is an A1 residential district. I'm not stopping there. It's not permitted anywhere in this town. Never has been, isn't now, and never should be. So, number one, you have to understand, I taught land use law schools for 41 years. Now I've switched to the professor mode. You have to understand, and I'm going to bet Mike Ziska will actually agree with me at some point, that zoning regulations come in two flavors. One of them is that if it's not expressly provided for in the regulations for that district, you can't do it. And the other one was, if we don't talk about it, go ahead. And here's your regulation. Here's what it says. 1.4A. Any use not specifically, I emphasize, specifically identified in these regulations as permitted in a zoning district by zoning permit, by site plan, by special use permit, or allowed without a permit, shall be deemed to be prohibited within such district. And then it goes on to say it's up to the zoning commission, if there's any ambiguity, to straighten it out. So there's a Latin phrase for this. 49 years ago when I graduated from law school, I forgot it that year. I have to look it up all the time. But there it is, little piece of trivia. Inclusio unius est exclusio. You probably can pronounce it better than I can. Alterius. And it just says, if it's not included, and manure lagoons of 2.91 acres are not included in your zoning regulations, it's excluded. So then I went on a search for manure. I never imagined, even at this late stage in my career, that I'd ever be dragged into a manure lagoon case, but I am. And so I did a word search for manure in your regulations. Has anybody done that besides me? Well, I did. So now I'm going to tell you what I found. There are 5 references to manure. You do talk about manure. You do have manure in your zoning regulations. You just don't have an enormous manure lagoon. So let's look at bottom of page 11. You do have regulation of, quote, manure storage. Manure storage. So long as it's generally accepted agricultural practices, and I'm not opining whether this one is or not. But look at this. 2 cubic yards. How much is 2 cubic yards? The record show I'm gesturing 2 cubic yards. Everybody with me? 2 cubic yards. That's it. Now, if you go 2 to 16 in your regulations, and you're more than 100 feet from a property line, fine. You can store it without a permit. ZPNR means, zoning permit not required. But if you're within 100 feet of a property line, or you're more than 16 cubic yards, that's as high as the regulation goes, is 16 cubic yards. But if you're 2 to 16 within 100 feet, or you're over 16, you're coming in for a special use permit. And that's why I think even if this board were to find, which I hope it doesn't, that manure lagoons are allowed as of right and anybody can come and build one anytime they want without any staff reviewing it, that they'll reach the second question that, if it is at all, it has to go through a permit process, which it has. And it's already in violation of the zoning, as I'll explain. So let's go to the next one. So I'm thinking, well, what does 16 cubic yards look like? So I went looking
I'm sorry, sir. Mr. Chair, can I ask a question of our presenter? Absolutely. How does any of this help me determine whether a manure pond is a farm pond?
Right.
Because it's all very interesting, especially the part about how much the cows crap in a day, but how can, none of this is of interest to me.
Yes.
What is the difference?
The reason why this is relevant to your consideration is that the use of the volume of material, the size of this installation is way beyond anything that the zoning commission contemplated in the regulation. So I want to point out, when I talk about 2 yards, 16 cubic yards, how different this is in terms of magnitude. And
Part of the definition you're telling me is the size? So if it's this big, it's a farm pond. If it's bigger or smaller, it can be a manure pond?
Yeah, I would suggest that the analysis is what this board is going to discuss at some point in its deliberations. Did the zoning commission intend in its regulations in describing a farm pond as an agricultural use that that term included something of this magnitude and use? So on page 12, there's a diagram of 18 cubic yards, more than the 12 or 16 talked about in the regulations, and it's not big. And so here, if you look at the volume of the lagoon, it's 36,787 cubic yards. And my argument is that the zoning commission could never have contemplated, when we were talking about 2 yards and 16 yards, that anything the size of 36,787 cubic yards of manure waste would be stored in the town as a matter of right. So let's go on to the next discussion of manure on page 13. And the other thing that's striking about the way manure is addressed in your regulations is it's about horses and ponies. It shows up 3 more times under horses and ponies. And, you know, the typical manure from somebody that's got 4, 5, or 6 horses, it's dry, it's stacked, it's in a pile, and that's it. This use is completely different. And if they wanted to allow this use, they would have said farmers can have manure lagoons just like you can keep horse manure in small quantities on your property. Finally, on the issue of manure storage, is that the regulations are specific about groundwater contamination. Let me start with, when I read out of manure references, I started looking for everything else that I could. And one thing I found was septage lagoons. Do you know that you regulate septage lagoons in town, private septage lagoons? In the old days, they would pump out your tank and take it to their private septage lagoon and have it treated and evaporated there and move on. Well, those aren't allowed anywhere that I can find. I don't think the state authorizes them anymore. And so your regulations at some point were amended to prohibit, and I'll give you some references to that septage disposal. Under prohibited uses, section 6.1, the middle of page 13, it says it lists a number of things that you can't do, for sure. And it says, quote, private septage lagoon or any other pond or depression used for holding domestic waste pumped from septic tanks. Now, what does that tell us? Well, domestic waste from septic tanks is not the same as cow manure. I give you that. But can you imagine that the zoning commission believed that a nearly 3-acre manure lagoon of over 7 million gallons would be allowed because it didn't specifically prohibit it? And the fact that they went out of their way to prohibit the private septage lagoons suggests to me, anyway, that they didn't want manure lagoons, period, in the town. So down the bottom of 13, we also discovered in a very careful review of the regulations that there is a provision on groundwater protection at section 7.12. It's intended to help protect groundwater quality in order to ensure an adequate supply of safe drinking water. Subsection 4, plans for new and enlarged manure storage sites. I think that's this. Plans for new and enlarged manure storage sites shall be submitted for review to the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection and the United States Department of Agriculture no later than the day of submission of any application for a zoning permit of such site. So far as we know, that application was never made. The request was void from the beginning because it failed to follow the mandatory conditions preceding to even asking the town whether they were exempt or not. Maybe they submitted it. Maybe you'll hear from Attorney Reiser that they have, but so far as we know, they don't. The last thing I want to touch on as I go over to the statutory definitions and the definitions in your regulations is the claim that, and it's important to know, it's important, as I said, to know what is here. It's not a concrete lined facility. It's not a tank. It's not a tank with leak monitors on the bottom and controlled air. It's not any of that. It's an open pit. It's got 2 feet of clay lining. Oak Ridge will tell you you're safe. It won't leak. I've given you some information from NRCS that says a lined septic lagoon is guaranteed to leak and will leak as much, in this case, as 3,000 gallons every day. And for planning purposes, they ought to plan on 5,000 gallons a day leaking down through the clay liner. So you have to understand the clay liner is an important part of this because they have an alternative in a tank with monitoring, with a berm in case there's a rupture, with capture of the emissions of air quality. But that's not this application, okay? You need to understand what that difference is. And then let me turn on 15. Why the definition of agriculture in the general statutes, which is important, if you haven't had your arms around it before in one of these cases, you will have to in this one. Why is the definition of agriculture in the general statutes and Summers' adoption of it, because the zoning commission has embraced that definition, as virtually every town has that I know. I think your counsel will tell you that, right? No body language from Attorney Ziska on that one. But most towns have simply adopted 1-1Q, which is the statute. You're going to hear some more about it in a moment. So why is it not a basis? Why is that statute and your regulations not a basis for finding that a manure lagoon is permitted without any local regulation, without any review? In the email to the CEO of March 25th, I would just note here, there's a discussion about the 360 rain irrigation system. Again, none of the literature that we can find, which is all included, and I may have missed things, and hopefully Oak Ridge will fill in the blanks where I've got it wrong or incomplete. But I can't find anything that references anywhere in any of these plans any state or federal approval, and no reference whatsoever to a manure lagoon in Summers. And in fact, we've just filed a Freedom of Information complaint for their CAFO, concentrated animal feeding operation, so we can understand more about what this is, because we really don't understand it yet completely. They did say that once the impoundment is completed and in use, the hauling in and out of manure to this property should be almost unnoticeable. You know, if this, again, this is not site plan review, not special use permit review, but when you allow something as of right with no review whatsoever, you miss the opportunity. I can't believe the zoning commission would miss the opportunity to have a traffic impact analysis of a facility this big. And I crunched the numbers a little bit myself, if they took just the 30% and they filled it once, okay, they're going to say 30% digestate, 70% out of the water, fill it once, that's 2.25 million gallons. That would be, and the tanker truck that I could find is 8,500 gallons, a little arithmetic. That's 262 tanker trucks in and out. But if they are they're going to take that stuff out and spray it on the crops, right? So they're going to be backfilling more digestate all the time. Now remember, this facility will only take a fraction of the digestate they produce. It could be as many as 1,442 trailer trucks in and out of there every year, 8,500 gallon capacity. articulated trucks. On in 16, here are your zoning regulations. Now we'll turn to the last part of this. Your zoning regulations at section 2.2 basically parrot what's in 1-1Q, which I'll get to in a moment. And like I said, just about everybody does this in my experience. And down here I highlighted the word reservoirs because that's one of the claims that this is a reservoir. I went to my dictionary, my favorite dictionary, Merriam-Webster. And it defines reservoir, and down the bottom of 16. And it defines it in a way that no one could imagine that the term reservoir, never mind farm pond, would be filled with manure. So, and the last of this is that the zoning regulations provide for earthworks, for excavation and the like at 8.4. And it does exempt some ponds, the middle of 17, from agricultural purposes. They don't need a zoning permit for that. That's a good thing. Farmers need to be able to make ponds here and there. So I get that. We get that. But here's the regulation. The construction of ponds for agricultural or conservation purposes, provided that the material removed is left on the site, and the earthwork does not affect any watercourse or wetlands, drainage, or flow, it will not cause soil erosion and so forth. Well, I'll just say that Bree Hyde on March 25th said, quote, "Next we will be excavating the impoundment and hauling out the sand, as it has no agricultural value to the property." So they're not even meeting the exception from the earthwork regulations, near as I can tell. And then on to the bottom of that page. What? Right. Well, yeah. Derek Donnelly's pointing out to me that in my rush to get this done more quickly than I said, that I should point out that the quote that I, in 5 on the middle of 17, said, "And any other state or municipal permits required for such activities have been issued." Like I said, there's no concentrated animal feeding operation permit that we can see for this. There was no submission to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, no submission to the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. They don't have any permits, near as we can tell. We're probably going to hear that they have some. We look forward to seeing that, but you have to have them all, and so far as we know, they don't. So, this last thing, 1-1Q. I have seen this problem so many times, and I'm not surprised that I'm seeing it here again. This is probably the longest definition. I can't get any reaction out of Mike Ziska. This is probably the longest definition in the statute, all right? And everybody falls asleep in the middle of it. And I'm not gonna punish you by reading it in its entirety. But look, it starts there on 17, and I will imagine that Oak Ridge will argue that somewhere in there is the key to their having an as-of-right manure lagoon like this. But here's what they miss. Flip over to 18. Nobody seems to ever get to the last sentence of that statute. The last sentence of that statute says, what's so important for a town like Somers, which wants to protect its water and its people, and the obligations of this board and the zoning commission to promote the public's health, safety, and general welfare, this last sentence says, nothing herein shall restrict the power of a local zoning authority under Chapter 124. That's the zoning enabling chapter. So if the zoning commission intended that manure lagoons would not be a permitted use, by not expressly saying that they are, and this board finds that to be the case, zoning in the town of Somers controls, not the state statutory broad definition of farming and agriculture that you've adopted as well. So in conclusion, I summarize, the state gives this town, its zoning commission, and this board the complete authority to limit and prohibit agricultural activities in its sole judgment. In its sole judgment. as it deems necessary to protect the public's health, the public's safety, and the public's welfare. A manure lagoon is not a permitted use in the town of Somers anywhere. The Zoning Commission's regulation of manure is at an exceedingly small scale to accommodate property owners with a few ponies and horses. The regulations do not comprehend an open pit manure storage facility of virtually 37,000 cubic yards. The express prohibition on private septage lagoons, as I told you about, to me is compelling evidence that the Commission never intended to permit any similar private waste lagoons in town, whether they're for agriculture or not. Oak Ridge has failed to follow the rudimentary and mandatory requirements of the groundwater protection regulations, mandating notice to the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection and the United States Department of Agriculture before it applied for any manure storage, even if we're not required to get a zoning permit, which they don't get that far in our view. And finally, this project, at its size, lined with clay, risks contaminating groundwater due to what even the federal regulators have said is a certainty that there will be some seepage or leakage. So those are my comments. It took me a little bit over a half hour. I do have in the materials, you'll see the long list of things, and let me quickly tell you what's in there as I wrap up here. I wanted you to be able to see both properties, so I've given you the property cards and maps. We asked Judge Berger, I got his opinion yesterday. I only tasked him, just tell me, do you think a farm pond in Somers is the same as a manure lagoon? Can they be equated? I had no more conversation with him than that. I got his opinion yesterday afternoon. It's included in the materials. You'll read his resume. He is the former chief land use judge in the state of Connecticut, now retired. Steve Trinkus is an engineer. He has written a very brief report because, like the chairman said, this is not a site plan review. This is not a special use permit. But we wanted to identify what the application was, and we found that it's different than apparently as publicly presented, and we show where those differences are. I provided you a butters list and maps so you can see the number of properties that are directly affected, represented here this evening, I would imagine. I wanted you to have the transmittal of the site plan by J.R. Russo and the site plan itself. And so that's in there. If they weren't in your package already, probably not. I don't know. I had this panel. You can keep this here because I wanted to make sure that everybody could see. I'm referring to this large mounted panel of what the design is, and that goes part of the record too. I've located where the manure lagoon is generally. It's close aboard to some resources. Now, and then I went and found as much as I could online about Oak Ridge Dairy's permitting, and I've included what I have. These appear to be drafts. Again, we're trying to find out more from the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, but we were required to submit an FOI request. And then their plan, their farmland restoration and climate resiliency plan, is their plan. But I made copies and gave them to you because they're going to claim that this 360 rain, which is a way of spraying on liquid irrigation on fields, is an approval of, some type of approval for this manure lagoon. It's not in there. The only reference I think that was in there that I found, I did full word searches on all these documents, was Somers pops up because it's shown as an abutting town. That's it. That's it, near as I can tell. But again, Oak Ridge may have more information. And then I've given you an excerpt from the NRCS Agricultural Waste Management Field Handbook, which does the computations for why this is guaranteed to leak. And then I give you Judge Berger's resume, Stephen Trinkus' resume, and my appearance that goes along with Derek Donnelly. Thank you for your attention. Members of the audience, again, pass that pad around, and give me your email clearly written, and we'll make sure you get a full set of all these materials, and we will be here to answer your questions and after we hear the presentations by those who made this decision and Oak Ridge, which would benefit by it.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, do we have any questions?
Yeah, thanks. So, Attorney, what? Oh, Attorney Merriam, I've got a couple.
What? From the board?
Yeah, I'm on the board, Dean.
Yes.
So I read Judge Berger's opinion. Am I accurately summarizing it when I say that he says there's no Connecticut definition of a farm pond? There's no Summers definition of a farm pond.
Right.
Other states have defined farm ponds as impounded water, etc. Other states have also specifically defined what a manure storage pond is. And the Department of Agriculture, U.S. Department of Agriculture, in discussing a farm pond, focuses on water uses, irrigation, water for livestock, fire protection, etc. Anything else in that opinion we should be aware of?
No, look at the concluding remarks in which he expresses his opinion based on what he saw. I want to tell you that I did a thorough national search. I was hoping to find a case or a statute. Judge Berger found some statutes that I didn't find. Hoping to find one that would give us an absolute clear path for you, but there isn't. These are fact-specific. This is fact-driven. Every town is different. Every set of zoning regulations is different. Every set of facts is different. And it's going to be this board's discretion as to whether it believes that a manure lagoon of this size is a, quote, farm pond. So I embrace his opinion, and was pleased to see that I reached largely the same conclusions. He did a better job than I did, though. Derek, did you have a comment?
Yeah, just let the record reflect that, even though he is a judge, it is an opinion, and he's not acting as a judge, so just for the record.
Yeah, just one thing to add to your assessment. There were also two towns in Connecticut.
Yeah, right. East Adam and Lyme.
That's
right.
correct.
Right.
That
Other towns. Yeah, I thought I mentioned other towns have defined it.
Yep.
Right.
Correct.
Are there any other questions from the board? Very good, thank you. Okay, Jen, are you guys next, or are we going with the Oak Ridge?
We'll go.
Okay, very good.
Speak at all, or?
So, for the record, Attorney Carl Landolina, here representing the Zoning Enforcement Officer. Seated to my left is Jen Roy, who you're familiar with. I guess I'll let Jen go first, just kind of explain the process, that how this was brought to her attention and then to my attention, and then I'll take over from there.
January, not back in the fall.
You can speak to the whole thing if you'd like.
Sure. Okay, Jennifer Roy for the record. Brief history. Back in the fall, we were before you for a variance request because Oak Ridge had come to my office, presented a manure lagoon site plan, discussed it with them and their engineer, correct term, Tim Cohn, and they wanted to excavate closer to the high water table than our regulations allowed. I said, well, first step you need to do is get a variance from that, and then we would proceed with the size of it. You should go to, and the amount of earthwork, you should go to the zoning commission. They came before you, saw the public, opposition, and decided, well, we're going to withdraw our application, and we will, come up with a new plan, a new approach to the project. Fast forward, in January, met with them again, Oak Ridge, presented a smaller, maybe nearly half the size, irrigation pond. You did receive the email correspondence back and forth. However, with all due respect, right, part of the email correspondence is missing, and part of the history. More part of the history, it wasn't necessarily an email correspondence. Bree emailed in detail what they wanted to do. I reached out to Carl Landolina. We actually had an in-person meeting and talked in depth about what they want to do, about different requirements that they had to do with DEEP, with their, I don't know all the acronyms, CAFO and NRCS and CNMP and all of the different things that they have to meet with DEEP. After that meeting, Carl, he can speak for himself, but, he asked him to forward us whatever they could for resources, and I believe everybody's had the opportunity to come see that. I forwarded it all to you with your agenda. Then Carl reviewed it, reached out to me, felt that it was an agricultural use as of right, confirmed you don't need a permit, and then we advised Oak Ridge. So there is missing. We did review in depth. We had a meeting with them. It wasn't just, okay, they can do it. That's probably all I really need to say for now.
Again, for the record, Carl Landolina, I'd like to preface my remarks by two things. Obviously, I'm in a different position right now. Sometimes I'm sitting over there where Attorney Ziska's sitting. Sometimes I'm here with Jen. Nothing I say is intended to give you, as a board, any legal advice. You'll get that from Attorney Ziska. So I'm just like anyone else sitting up in this chair at this point. The other thing I would say is that although the decision was made based upon conversations I had with Jen, reviewing the records, the zoning regulations, discussing this with folks from Oak Ridge Dairy, I don't think Jen or I necessarily take a position. This is the way the process works. Anyone at any time, well, within the appeal period, can appeal any decision made by the zoning enforcement officer. Now, in this case, she came to me for some review of the regulations, in my opinion, as to whether this was permitted at all, prohibited, or permitted without any type of permit, or if it was permitted, what type of permits would be necessary. But beyond that, the process works the same. Somebody doesn't like that decision, they come before you, and you have a hearing like this. Well, this is the first time I've ever had to park close to Kibbe Road. I guess there was a few people at the softball or baseball game. But in any event, I just want you to understand that. We really don't take a position. I can tell you factually what I did, then explain what she did, and then it'll be left up to the five of you to make a decision as to whether to uphold their decision or not. And I'm sure Attorney Ziska will verse you very well in your obligations going forward. So I'm glad that Jen spoke to the sort of timeline. I know that Mr. Merriam, Attorney Merriam, is a very qualified gentleman. He knows what he's talking about, but I don't know if this was intentional or not, but he made it sound like we took 30 seconds to make this decision. It was probably 2 or 3 weeks in between the time, at least it was introduced to me, until that last round of emails when I said, it sounds to me like an exempt use under agriculture, and she wrote back and said, no permits, and I said, yes. All right, so there was a gap of some time in there. It wasn't 5 minutes. I didn't go get a cup of coffee and then come back and say, yeah, it's agriculture. So I'll tell you what I did when I learned about this. One of the first things I wanted to understand is what is going to happen on the property. First of all, the main focus of our attention with respect to the zoning regulations is whether this required an earthwork permit under Section 8, I believe it's 820 in Section 8. So we went through those regulations, And I'll admit that Mr. Attorney Merriam did bring up something that I offer to you, which is I was not aware that the material was going to leave the site, and I understand that. That would have, I don't know if it would have changed my opinion at all, but, there is a section that says, if the material leaves the site, it might be treated differently. Our focus was groundwater protection in the way that the pond was going to be constructed. And Jen and I had several conversations, and my first opinion was that even though it may be exempt from a special permit under the earthwork and excavation section of the regulations, that we could still, as Attorney Merriam pointed out, I have read 1-1Q many times, and I never fall asleep in the middle. I always go to the end, and I know what it says about zoning regulations. So notwithstanding the fact that it might have, in some cases, been exempt, we were concerned about the depth to groundwater. And the first proposal they sent us, even though it had this clay lining, was 2 or 3 feet from groundwater. And I explained to the folks at Oak Ridge, I don't think Attorney Famigletti was involved yet, that I thought, and I explained this to Jen, that even though they may be exempt from getting an earthwork permit, that they had to satisfy the requirement that they remain at least 5 feet from the groundwater, seasonal high groundwater table. And that's required in your regulations. So I presented that to them. About a week later, they came back with another design of a similar structure that was 5 feet from groundwater, the seasonal high groundwater. So based upon that, it was my opinion that it was exempt from at least those sections of the regulations. I checked to see what other towns were doing. I looked for cases myself, and as I think Attorney Ziska and Attorney Merriam will submit to you, it's not allowed out there on farm ponds. And, you can just, in terms of argument, they'll make their arguments as to why it's not or is. It's just not there. So that's why I stopped my analysis there with respect to how do we regulate this. So, yes, we do go to Dwight's ancestors sometimes, the Merriam folks who wrote the, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Dictionaries.
One of the dictionaries we used. Didn't find that much use one way or the other. And one of the things I'm not trying to make argument, but my thought process was that zoning regulations are in derogation of property rights. So they are generally to be strictly construed in that generally, unless there's something that's clearly prohibited, if it's a close call, we sometimes will favor the property owner because the zoning regulations, when the first zoning regulations came out in city of Euclid in Ohio, went to the Supreme Court because people were screaming, "You're taking my property without just compensation." The Supreme Court said, no, you can do that in this circumstance. But the case law in Connecticut is, be careful how you use the zoning regulations because you are taking people's rights away from them. Yes, did I know that there was a, we'll call it a bias. Not all biases are good or bad. They just exist for farm activity and agricultural activity in the state of Connecticut. So I can't say that wasn't in my mind as well. I looked through the table of prohibited uses. I didn't see anything I thought was close. I looked through the stormwater and groundwater protection regulations. I went through the manure section. It seemed to be, as Attorney Merriam said, more about humid sewage and, farms that have ponies and where you store this stuff. I inquired from the applicant because this material that goes into the pond is a fertilizer. What do you use to fertilize now? And my recollection is that they informed me that they use cow manure. So that went into my decision as well. I didn't see the difference necessarily between storing fertilizer in the barns or on the property and using cow manure. It's just being spread, in my mind, logically or not, in a different manner. It's being liquefied, added to water, and then spread on the fields instead of, I didn't grow up in a farm town, but I used to come to Ellington quite a bit, and when the cow manure was being spread at certain times of the year, you knew it. So I didn't really perceive a difference in that manner. I know that human sewage is treated much differently than animal waste. For instance, my experiences show me that if you want to get permission to put human sewage on a farm field, which at one time DEEP allowed you to do, you had to let it sit there for years and years before you could grow any food there. I never knew, I'm not aware of any regulations for doing that with animal waste. So I looked at all of those sections. I didn't see anything, in my view at that time, with my analysis, that would have prohibited this use. It's an accessory use, in my mind, to a agricultural use. Farmers irrigate all the time with bodies of water, and sometimes they are quite large. If I own a 50-acre farm and there's a 3-acre or 5-acre pond on my property, why can't I, this is my thought process, why can't I irrigate with the water in my pond? Now, the difference is, of course, that here they're adding something to it. So that'll be your decision. So, again, that was sort of my thought process. I went through the regulations, and based upon all that, I said to Jen, I think it's probably, I said it is a use that is permitted as an agricultural use, and that I told them they had to give the Oak Ridge folks their permit. Now, they had also told us that they had had talked to state and local officials and state and federal officials. So I took them at their word on that. Most of the things that they provided to me were of little use to me because they weren't specific to our regulations or the Summers regulations, and most of them were, I know most of the material they provided were about exceptions for wetlands regulations. That didn't mean anything to me. But as I say, I went through the material, and this is where I landed at that point. And then I guess the rest will be up to you.
Very good. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you. Attorney Landolina, so you don't really, and correct me if I'm wrong, you don't really care whether it's defined as a farm pond or a manure storage facility. You said from your review, it is not otherwise prohibited, and therefore it must be approved.
It's part of what I said, but first of all, again, I don't want to argue about the idea that one of the ideas I did look at. I understand your regulations very well, and the regulations are what we call permissive. In other words, if it's not expressly permitted, it is prohibited. But agricultural uses and uses accessory to those agricultural uses are certainly permitted uses. So if it wasn't on the expressly prohibited side and it was expressly permitted as a use, the only question was what kind, if any, permit was required. So that's what my analysis was. I don't know if that answers your question, Mr. Rocket.
Yeah, so again, you don't care what it's characterized at. It's permitted because your review, each particular regulation, whether it's agricultural water use or groundwater or whatever, there was no prohibition, and there were specific ones which may or may not have included manure ponds, or whatever you call them.
Yeah, again, the manure storage regulations, in my view, did not apply, and that's where it would have been regulated, if it was to be regulated differently than any other agricultural use of manure, then I would have thought it would have been in there. It wasn't.
Okay,
So that
thanks.
didn't lead me to a different conclusion.
All right, thank you.
John, go ahead.
I want to clarify a point that you made, and you've done some due diligence throughout this, but there was a point that you made around earthwork regulations, where you said had you paid attention or read that more thoroughly in terms of their intent to remove materials from the site work. So Section 8.4 earthwork regulations in our zoning regulations, Article B5 states, and I'm just going to read this for everybody, the construction of ponds for agricultural or conservation purposes, provided that the material removed is left on the site and earthwork does not affect any watercourses or wetlands, drainage, or flow that will not cause soil erosion, sedimentation problems, or any other state municipal permits required for such activity have been issued. It clearly states in the correspondence that we've read and the proposal that there's an intention to remove materials. And I heard you say that had you read that, you may have rendered a
No, it
different
wasn't
decision.
in the materials that we were provided.
Okay.
That's material that came up after the fact. It may have been their intention, but it wasn't discussed with us.
And can you take us through that process? So you had a meeting, Jen, you mentioned in January, it was in January you had a meeting. Yeah, right, January.
I don't know.
It was somewhere in there. It was earlier this year you had a meeting with Oak Ridge, right, where you kind of discussed that. When did this discovery take place? Was it before you rendered a decision or after you rendered a decision?
What discovery are you talking
Discovery of the email correspondence from Bree that clearly states that they intend to remove all of the sand from the property because it has no agricultural purpose.
about? I don't. It's the first I've heard of it.
Right. Without going back to the email history, that may have been brought up later after telling him it's an agricultural use, but XYZ, you have to keep everything on site. I'd have to read back through the email chain after that.
And so, just to help myself here on this, if you approve something from the zoning office, which is stated one way, and then at one point there's discovery of, hey, there's a violation of our zoning regulations, what's the protocol at that point?
It would be the standard zoning enforcement procedure. Issue a notice of violation, ask for voluntary compliance. If not, issue a cease and desist.
In whether they actually have started to do it or they state they're going to do it, would we have then? In her correspondence, it clearly states, and I read it prior to this meeting as well, where it clearly states that the intention to remove the sand from the site.
Right.
Had that been addressed with them?
Right. I'd have to look through the email. I don't know if it was verbally talked about or an email after the fact, after we said this, because there was emails and phone calls.
Okay.
You know, so I recall some conversation about it. Maybe Oak Ridge can clarify on their end, receiving information from me. But they still have to follow the regulations. If we're saying it's a use as of right, they still have to follow all of the other stated, what you're reading. They have to follow that.
Okay.
If they don't, I issue a notice of violation.
Okay. Thank you.
And also, just to clarify one more thing, I just want to kind of stay on the record that I received a phone call today from Deep, because they got a complaint and they heard about the public hearing tonight, and they have been fully aware and in communication with Oak Ridge, and that might be something that they'll share, but because Deep reached out to me, unsolicited phone call to confirm that they've been aware of the project. They do have to fill out certain reports. They can speak better to the reports. I tried to jot notes down as she was talking to me, but they have a working relationship with Oak Ridge, and they were aware of the project.
Well,
Two questions. First of all, if it was permitted as of right,
within the earthworks regulations, well, first of all, permitted as of right, but they was thought to comport with the earthwork regulations. If they were found to be in violation of the earthwork regulations by removing material, they would be subject to a cease and desist order. Am I not correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So it's nothing that would be irremediable. It's something that could be acted upon.
Well, correct. I mean, if they move one load of sand out and then it's brought to my attention, then I take action. I can't take action if they haven't actually removed something.
Just as it was a winery approved and subsequent violations occurred and cease and desist orders were issued, the same procedure would apply here.
Correct.
One other question. Since you indicated that there are gaps in the email history that was provided by Attorney Merriam, could you provide the board with a full email history?
I did correct myself. It wasn't. I corrected it to that the history, the timeline is incorrect. It's not all in the email.
Okay, so we do have the full email exchange?
You do have the full email exchange.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
There was a meeting. I interjected that we had a physical meeting in my office and discussed it.
May I ask a
That's what's
question?
missing. It wasn't just an email, here's what we want to do, and then Carl's email saying they can do it as of right. In between, there was phone conversations, just to clarify. Okay? No, we don't do dictation at meeting.
Absolutely. Attorney Ziska.
Michael Ziska for the record. Ms. Roy, how did you communicate your decision to Oak Ridge Dairy? Was it simply verbal? Or
No, it was an email.
You sent an email. Is that included in the package as
Yes.
well? I didn't see an email to Oak Ridge Dairy after Carl's email.
Carl's email to me. Oh, here's the
The latest one we have is the March 31st, where Carl said to you, that is correct.
I would have to check my folder. This is just what Dwight put in his packet.
It would be good to have a copy of that email just for our
Right.
record.
Okay.
Thank you.
There was an email to Oak Ridge. That's the date that the applicant used triggering the appeal. So that was the official date that they used, and sometime in April. I'd have to look through my paperwork.
Well, perhaps Attorney Reiser has that email?
Maybe.
Sean, did you have another question?
Yeah, Jen, one more question for you. Obviously, the zoning regulations go so far as it's been discussed, and to you, Attorney, is that in there's a lot of points in the discussion, in the zoning regulations about the harmony of a zoning district. And, you know, what's great about Summers is the agricultural nature of this town and the deep history that the role agriculture has played. Over time, what's happened is the composition of the town is ever evolving, and there's more residential. As I was doing my research for this, there's some statutes in there from the state of Connecticut that speak to proximity of storage of manure within residential districts, but it doesn't address ponds or lagoons, unfortunately. How do you, when you get requests like these, and understanding the regulations go so far as it's been decided, the scope obviously is very unique, and it's up for interpretation. We have commissions like these, whether it be the Zoning Commission, the Zoning Board of Appeals, the Planning Commission, residents here. How are commissions and boards consulted when we have uniqueness and blurry lines to make sure that albeit may be approved or not, but at least are being approved with context to what the community is equally interested in, and also done in harmony with where the town has been historically, but also to where the town is evolving?
I'm not sure I understand your question. I don't think you're asking me a specific question for this application.
Yeah.
Again, for the record, Carl Andolina. So, Commissioner, what you're referring to are general sort of standards, and those are applicable when somebody comes in for a permit. There are especially special use permits. The commission can take into consideration harmony with the neighborhood, so on and so forth. But in these kinds of situations, we take a more strict interpretation approach. What do the words say that we can give meaning to are not necessarily subjective, because we don't work in a subjective world. The zoning commission works in a somewhat subjective world at times when they're dealing with special permits, but we try to stay out of that world as best we can. So it's not something that I would have considered the harmony of the neighborhood, because I don't think the courts allow me to do that when looking at a strict interpretation of the language of the zoning regulations.
So then my follow-up is that you perceive this application to be black and white, then?
As much as I could, yes. I think that would have been my job.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Out of curiosity, Kyle, are you of the opinion that a special use permit would be required because it's over 16 cubic yards of manure type substance?
No, I looked at the manure storage, and I didn't think they were applicable in this circumstance.
Could you offer any
I don't have any comments on this, obviously.
substance to that for us? Why?
So let me get that section out. What page is that, Dwight? Well, you got this memorized. No, the newer story. He's got his hearing aid turned on.
I can get that for you.
Yeah, what page is it?
It's page 31. No.
No, it's got to be further
No,
back.
it's page 35. Paragraph 4, animal-related, subparagraph D, manure storage. Or, sorry, paragraph 5, agriculture-related, D, manure storage.
My hand on.
Yeah, it's 45 on the zone regs.
Yeah, I frankly didn't look at this as a storage facility. So that's why I didn't think it applied.
Very good. Anything, other questions? Thank you. Oak Ridge, you're up.
Can you repeat what you said?
None of us heard that.
No. What did you say about a storage facility?
You didn't what?
He didn't consider it a storage facility.
You didn't what?
Thank you.
Pond?
Oak Ridge will be addressing that issue.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Dory Reiser. I'm an attorney at Kahan, Kerensky, Capicella. I am working with Oak Ridge tonight in connection with the defense of this appeal, which is a pretty straightforward question being presented to this board. We've heard lots of terminology thrown around. We've talked about farm ponds and irrigation ponds and manure lagoons. And frankly, following up on what Board Member Rocket was saying, it almost doesn't matter what you term it. Is it agriculture? That is the very limited sole question before you, this board tonight. That is what the regulations say is permitted use in this zone. That is what the town attorney and your zoning agent, Jen Roy, said it was permitted as agriculture. That's all we care about. Is this agriculture. We heard a lot about the use, what it's going to be. We heard about the size. We heard about the content. It's agriculture. This is not a special use permit. This is not a special exception. It's not a variance, and it's not even a site plan review. We're not getting into how this will be constructed, how it will be operated and managed. Those are relevant, not for this board, though. The sole question is this agriculture? Your regulations, as well as the state statute, defines agriculture very broadly. It includes the construction, operation, or maintenance of ditches, canals, reservoirs, or waterways used exclusively for farming purposes. Everything I've heard tonight is this is a pond to be filled with water with a nutrient additive, which is called digestate, which is used for fertilizing fields. That is a farm purpose, irrigation and feeding the fields. Now, speaking of irrigation, I will follow up on what Attorney Landolina was saying as why he does not view this to be a manure storage facility. Because the intent of this is not for storage of manure. The intent of why this pond is being dug is for irrigation purposes, and that was clearly disclosed in the dialogue with the town. So this is a waterway, it's a reservoir, it's a pond, it's whatever you want to call it, but it holds water and it holds digestate, which is manure and water, for purposes of irrigating and fertilizing the farm, which is not different than what's going on right now on the property. Oak Ridge has been farming this property for years. They bring manure in, they spread manure, and they water. And since they've had their anaerobic digester in operation in Ellington for a few years now, they've been bringing digestate in and spreading that on the fields. So this is not all that different from what is...
Excuse me, Dory. All right, this is the last time I'm going to ask the audience to be quiet, all right? I don't care if you don't like anybody else's opinion, but I ask you to respect it. Now, please be quiet and let Dory make her presentation without your interruptions.
Thank you. Again, this is not very different than what's been happening. We have trucks going to the site now to deliver manure, to deliver digestate, and to manage the fields. And that will continue happening after this irrigation pond is constructed. This is just a new way to apply the fertilizer to the field. So, again, it brings us back to the singular question. Is this irrigation pond, farm pond, manure lagoon, whatever you want to call it, is it agriculture per your definitions? For that, you just have to simply look at the definition of agriculture on page 10 of your regulations, which is very similar to the definition of agriculture in the state statute. You have to look at your table of permitted uses, page 30, section 3.2, C, agriculture 1, farm and agriculture, allowed, zoning permit not required in the residential zone. Is this agriculture? I would ask you, how is it not? This pond is being used to irrigate crops and to fertilize crops. That is the defined purpose of agriculture. You might go on to ask, well, if it's not regulated by the town, then is it regulated at all? Yes. The answer is yes, but not by this board, not by the zoning board. It's going to be reviewed by DEEP because Oak Ridge has to amend and change its CAFO plan to include the pond. And DEEP will review that, and they will confirm that the pond is built to NCRS standards, which it has been designed to be built to per our engineers. So this is all separate and apart from local regulation here. Now, that doesn't mean that these concerns aren't valid, but they are to be reviewed as part of NCRS design requirements and DEEP's oversight and review of the changes to the CAFO permit to include this irrigation pond. I want to pick up on a few things that were presented. by Attorney Merriam. He said, how did this happen? How did the town make the mistake? Again, I don't think the town made any mistake. I think that the regulations are very clear that agriculture is a permitted use. I think there was a thorough review. It was vetted by the town attorney and the zoning agent, along with Oak Ridge Dairy, to understand the specifics of the operation, and they came to the appropriate conclusion that this is an agricultural use, permitted as of right. It is not a storage facility. Again, it's not meant to store manure. It's meant to irrigate and fertilize crops. So I believe that Attorney Landolina conducted a review of all relevant sections of your regulations and came to the appropriate and correct conclusion. In addition, we believe that no earthworks permit is necessary because you could deem this, again, either to be normal agricultural operations or the construction of ponds for agricultural purposes. And if you have a concern about the statement made by Ms. Hyde that the sand will be removed from the site, then we could certainly say the sand will not be removed from the site. That's an easy fix. So this is permitted as of right. There's nothing in your regulations that prohibits it. Granted, there's nothing that specifically calls out manure ponds, irrigation ponds, whatever you want to call it. However, Attorney Landolina brought you through that analysis and said, although it's not specifically called out, local regulations are in derogation of property rights, and let's look at this. If there's a way that we can interpret agriculture, which is not a stretch, to include this use, then that's protecting property rights. And for crying out loud, in a community that's an agricultural community with over 300 years of agricultural experience, with thousands of acres dedicated and or preserved for agricultural purposes, this community values its farms, has protected its farms, and we ask you to do the exact same thing tonight by upholding the decision that was made by your zoning agent and your town attorney. This is the epitome of agriculture, and everything we heard is an effort to derail that simple conclusion. Everything in Judge Berger's opinion letter is out of context. Oak Ridge Dairy did not read this exemption. We mistakenly thought the wetlands exemption applies because it's agriculture. There's no wetlands impact. We are not proposing to construct this irrigation pond, farm pond, whatever you want to call it, within a wetland, a watercourse, or an upland review area. So that whole 22A40 exemption and what's allowed as of right, that's not even a consideration. So although Judge Berger analyzes it and assesses it, it's not relevant at all to the town's consideration here or Oak Ridge's consideration. And his analysis as whether this is a farm pond, again, semantics. I don't care if it's a farm pond. This falls squarely, in our opinion, in your town attorney's opinion, in your zoning agent's opinion, and hopefully in your opinion, as an agricultural use. You just have to look at the definition in the state statute and in your own regulations, and you will see that. I don't want to go off topic. I don't want to address all of the other questions that were asked and raised tonight by Attorney Merriam, because again, that is just muddying the waters and taking away from what the focus should be. What the focus should be, which is this an agricultural use permitted as of right? Yes, it is, and I can't see how you can find otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney. Any questions? All right, already. That's enough of that. Questions, please.
Thank you, sir. So, I have a big pond. It's mostly water. There's a lot of manure in there to be mixed with water and used for irrigating and fertilizing your fields.
Correct.
How much manure?
It's 70% fresh water pumped in from another source on site, and it will be 30% digestate, which is not solid manure, but is in fact a manure water mix.
Oh, yeah?
So you don't know how much manure?
I can't tell you how much manure is in the digest state. I know it's 30-70 mix.
If there were more than 16 cubic yards, would you need a special use permit?
No, because this is not a manure storage facility. This is not manure storage. It's not solid manure being stored. It is a pond used for irrigating and fertilizing the crops.
Okay, so you don't know how much manure is going to go in there. It's dilute manure, but still manure.
Diluted manure that's presently being applied to the fields today.
And even though you're holding it, I won't say the word storage, I'll say holding it. If I'm holding more than 16 cubic yards, couldn't I consider it a special use permit required?
You know what? The zoning board has the authority to determine if there's any uncertainty how something should be regulated. If a use is not specifically identified, and if it's uncertain, the zoning commission can determine how it should be handled.
Right.
And we feel that there's no uncertainty. There's a very specific definition of a permitted use, which is agriculture. Agriculture, including reservoirs that are used exclusively for farming purposes. And this pond, whether you use it for fertilizing or for irrigation, is exclusively for farming purposes. So we don't believe that either the zoning board or this board should determine to be anything but that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Quick one. I know you don't want to talk to the specifics, but I'm going to ask you anyway. You talk about the 30%, 70% combination.
Yes.
Is that roughly or precisely what's being used right now when the parade of green trucks comes up Route 83 every time there's going to be rain to spread in the field? Is it roughly that concentration now?
I don't know that I can answer that. I know that
I'm hoping somebody can.
Yeah.
Currently, it's 100% manure.
Okay.
There's no water in those trucks.
Right. And would the 360 rain system work very well if it was a heavier concentration of manure?
No, it needs both.
It needs both. Okay. And roughly that amount?
Yes, that's what the corn plant needs to grow.
Is your ratio dictated as much by how the system works as by any?
No, the ratio is dictated by what a corn plant needs for uptake of nitrogen.
Okay.
So if you were going to be planting some other crop or something, it could be a different ratio mix. But
Correct.
because you're using your fields for corn, the 70-30 is what's specified.
But virtually all your fields.
Mr. Chairman, can we just have the witnesses identify themselves? For
Oh,
the
yes,
record?
I'm sorry, yes. Can you please state your name and address?
David Moser.
That was David Moser with Oak Ridge Dairy.
Okay. Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Attorney.
Attorney Reiser, I think it's critical for the board to understand exactly what decision has been made. And right now, we don't have a written decision. Is there a written decision?
We have a copy of the email from Jen Roy that states that this is agriculture. An excerpt of that was included in Attorney Miriam's, and that is what we use for purposes of our publication of legal notice.
Okay, what page?
Attorney Miriam's, bear with me. Page 7.
Okay.
So this is, this is what he gave you was the email between Carl and Jen, but we have a copy of that too.
Okay, so that is the decision that was provided to you, the copy
Yes.
of the email from Jen to Carl?
Yes, that is what we have.
Dated March 31st.
Exactly, and that's what
That's the only...
That's the only
written
decision.
Okay.
And so that's why our publication of legal notice says it's exempt from zoning approval by reason of being in agricultural use, because that's specifically what that spoke to.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Yes.
Thank you.
One more question, if I may, Mr.
Go
Chairman.
ahead, Ralph.
Bree Hyde's email to Jen Roy of March 25th, the long one,
Okay.
with the exception of the question of the removal of the land, of the sand from the property.
Yes.
Could that email be taken as a for want of a better word, a stipulation of the terms by which they would expect to abide?
Yes,
Could it be entered as such?
yes.
Thank you.
And we could, if need be, although I don't think need be, because I don't think that provision of the regulations applies, if we couldn't take the sand off site, we would make accommodation for it on site.
Sean, a couple questions. Just referring to the definition of agriculture as you referred to it on page 10 of the zoning regulations, and I believe, I just want to clarify that I'm interpreting it the way that you're interpreting it. Is it bullet number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6?
Yes.
Where it states the production or harvesting of maple syrup or maple sugar or any agricultural commodity, including lumber, as an incident to ordinary farming operations or harvesting of mushrooms, the hatching of poultry, or the construction, operation, maintenance of ditches, canals, reservoirs, or waterways. And pause for a second. This you're referring, and I heard you reference reservoir. Is that?
I liken this containment system to be most similar to a reservoir, so that's why I have been using that word.
Okay. And then again, and this is will segue into my second question, and used exclusively for farming purposes.
Correct.
In an article from 2021, and this is where I just want to clarify, this was a Tex Explorer article talking about Connecticut's largest dairy farm taps into new energy markets with plentiful supply of cow manure. I won't read the article, it can be found online, but it talks about how the gases, the off gases, and maybe this is a separate operation, but I want to be clear, are being transformed and sold to companies at a company in New Jersey. Can you, with 100% certainty, tell me that this agricultural pond, as it's being said, is only for agricultural purposes, and the gases or anything else won't be used for other purposes?
I have to consult with my client on that, but I believe that the gases are as part of the anaerobic digester system they have in Ellington. This isn't for harvesting gases and selling energy. This is just solely for
So 100% of everything.
Is that correct? What you're talking about is in the digester.
You identify yourself.
That's Breehide for the record.
We're not getting this on the record.
For the record, Breehide is stating that the gases are associated with the anaerobic digester, not this 360 irrigation pond. Do you want?
Please state your name and address for the record.
Sure.
Please.
So my name is Bree Hyde, and the reference that you have there is in regard to the digester on the property at Oak Ridge.
In Ellington.
In Ellington.
So then just
And it is not a manure lagoon, it's not an irrigation pond, it is a giant digester. Nothing similar to what.
So 100% of everything that is either put into this pond, taken out of this pond, stored in this pond, will be used for purely for agricultural in the town of Summers on that parcel of property.
100%.
And then how many acres are farmed on that parcel?
The
In
Summers
Summers?
property,
Yeah.
the entire property is 270.
And how many times a year is manure spread on those crops? 2 times a year?
Right now,
Currently spring and fall.
And then how much manure is used in each time that you treat those crops twice a year? In for each time? How much manure is used?
10,000 gallons to the acre.
You're going to repeat that, Joe.
it's 10,000 gallons to the acre.
I think we're getting a little bit off topic here because we're really trying to determine if this is a pond or,
Agreed. Again, I understand your concern. There's been a lot of questions around the details of this operation
And the pond, but the limited question before this board is, was the zoning agent and town attorney correct in their decision that this is agriculture and therefore permitted? Thank you.
any further questions? Thank you, Patricia.
Email that you've been asking us about.
Okay, very good. Come on up.
Jennifer Roy for the record. I did find in my file, which has been available for public viewing, an email chain, my email dated Monday, March 31st, to Oak Ridge, stating that Carl has reviewed the documents that they sent and asking for a site plan and that it has been considered an agricultural use and no permit is needed. So the next email in the same chain is to Dwight Merriam, CC Carl Landolina, April 23rd. Dwight, as you requested, below is the email chain advising Oak Ridge Dairy regarding the pond. So that's the written email.
Very good, thank you,
In
John.
question.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Did you want me, are you to read or at the end
Oh,
of the
yes.
public, or do you want me to?
If you want to do that now while you're here, that's fine.
Okay. So this
We
is the
have some
written
correspondence.
written correspondence, and I'll provide this to you guys after in detail because some of them are pretty lengthy. Scott and Tracy Wiley in opposition, 54 Lubier Drive. Ray Robidoux, 197 King Road, in opposition. Well,
Ms.
they're
Roy-
not in opposition of the applicant, so they're actually, they
Gotcha.
opposite.
They're in opposition to
They're in
the
opposition of the
appeal.
pond, so they're in agreement with the appeal.
In agreement.
They're in
For the
agreement
record.
with the
Yes.
appeal.
Right. This is from Karen Kosker, 156 Watchog Road, in agreement of the appeal. Pat Brower, 74 Hamden Road, in agreement of the appeal. Amy and Jeremy Zarella, 176 Watchog Road, in agreement with the appeal. That's it for written correspondence.
Thank you, John. Okay.
You want me to state it, or I said that already?
You got it from Amy and
Zarella, what did it say?
Okay, we're going to open up for public comment. You're welcome to comment. Please, as I said before, please be respectful. Please state your name and address prior to making your comments. And again, if we don't want to say the same thing over and over and over again, so if you wish to be on the record and somebody has spoken to your issue, please remember their name and say that you are you concur with them. So, John, go ahead. Yep. In case, there's a sign-in sheet on the table. You could sign in, but still, please state your name and address.
Yes. John Parks. My address is 37 Eleanor Road, Somers, Connecticut.
It's getting picked up, is it?
It's on.
Hello, John Parks. Can you hear me?
I don't know if you muted it. I turned it on. It might be muted. Talk close to it.
Thank you. John Parks. I'm a resident of Somers. I've lived here my entire life. I practiced law here for 46 years. I've limited my practice to land use. I was involved with the 2021 revision of the town's regulation. I went to most of the town meetings about this regulation. I can tell you that the regulation was, this was a major overhaul of our regulation. Our regulation prior to this was about a quarter of this size. I have highlighted the sections that Attorney Merriam referenced in his presentation. I think it's good to see it in the context of the entire regulation, which I think is how it should be read. But it's very clear to me as a resident, as an attorney, and as someone that was involved in the preparation of these regulations that anything that was not permitted is excluded. I think this is an interesting legal approach to call this farming, because essentially, all you have to do is to get on Route 83 and drive through Ellington, and that's exactly what's coming to Summers. So they're exporting waste from Ellington to Summers under the guise of fertilizer. This is a problem that the largest dairy farm in the state of Connecticut that can't contain, and all you got to do is drive to Ellington to understand this, that can't contain the waste that they're creating, a byproduct from a dairy farm operation, and ship it out here. I think Ellington allowed this. Ellington embraced it. Ellington should keep it. I don't think the town of Summers deserves this. And I'd like to introduce this regulation for the record. I don't know who's taking things.
You can hand that to Ralph, please. If the next person, while she's speaking, would like to come up and sign in, we can maybe just speed it up a little bit.
Ann Levesque, 2304 Bridges Road. I live between the land that belongs to Oak Ridge all my life. I've been in Summers. I'm a farm girl. Grew potatoes. My father grew potatoes. The fact is, the farm that has the land between Hulbert Road and George Wood Road in the spring, when they're putting that manure or so-called nutrient-laced manure, I don't know, it's impossible to be outside in the spring because of the smell. It seems toxic. And I would like to see an independent study done about the effects of that in the air for breathing, for growing the corn, for having it as silage, for the milk in the cows, and what that happens to us when we have the milk. Maybe Ellington likes to be called Smellington. That's another name for it. I'm serious. It's also known as Smellington. You pass through that many times and there's this awful smell there. But the fact is, I don't think that a pond that contains water is the same as the pond that contains diluted manure. And I don't think that this should be done in our community in such a large scale. We don't want that. Summers doesn't want to be another Smellington. Thank you.
I'm John Papali. I live at 22 Bridle Path Drive in Summers.
Louder?
Yeah, just speak up a little if you can, please. Thank you.
22 Bridle Path. John Papali, 22 Bridle Path Drive, Summers. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you. I don't have anything against farmers. My grandfather was a farmer in Cheshire, Connecticut, and where I used to pick strawberries every Sunday in the early summer. There's now $1 million homes, and times are changing. Attorney Reiser alluded to the fact that Summers is a farming community, but we're not the same as we were 300 years ago. There are a lot of people that live here, and the agricultural community must be able to live with those people who built expensive houses here, and it's their home, and they want to stay there for the rest of their life. We heard different opinions tonight from 3 attorneys, Mr. Merriam, Mr. Park, Ms. Reiser, and it's clear to me that we're not going to settle this here. It really has to be settled by a judge with, the attorneys for Oak Ridge presenting their point of view, and the attorneys for the town presenting their point of view. I mean, my question would be very simple to the residents here. How many of you would be in favor of having this structure on that parcel of land?
Okay, Don,
Is there?
we're not going to do an opinion poll
Well,
here.
no, I think it's important.
Hold on. I can tell you that everybody here, that all the hands are going up. That's a foregone conclusion. So that's not the issue here.
So then, if
let's
that
get to the
is a
issue.
fact,
Okay.
if that is true,
Okay, we
and I
need
was
to kind
trying
of
to assess that,
concentrate
because
on
I'm not
the
sure of
issue
that.
at hand.
But if that is true,
That's so much.
if that is true,
I understand that.
and I don't know Mr. Merriam, but I know Mr. Park. Many of us know Mr. Park. He's well respected in this community. He handed you
I've worked with Mr. Parks many times.
right, and he disagrees with Ms. Reiser. He didn't leave any bones about it. And if he is correct, then I think it's incumbent upon our elected officials and our officials who volunteer, such as you, because none of you are doing this for the money. I know that, and I give you great I give you great kudos, because most of us couldn't do what you do. But if that is true, that these two attorneys are correct, then we need to go to court and let a judge decide. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Pat Bannock. I've lived at 104 Green Tree Lane in Summers for over 40 years. You said at the beginning of the meeting that what we had to decide is this a farm pond or not? Because Attorney Reiser says that agriculture covers it all. But I believe what you were saying was it's only agriculture if it's a farm pond. And I think that we're making this way more complicated than it needs to be. All you need to do is go on to Google. A farm pond is a man-made impoundment of water, typically on a farm or ranch, created either by constructing a dam or excavating a pit. It is designed to provide water for livestock, irrigation, which is watering, not fertilizing, and potentially for recreation, wildlife habitat, or fire control. That's the definition. Okay, I know there's legal definitions and there's Google definitions, but this is a simple, understood definition of a farm pond. I don't know why we are trying to stretch the definition of a farm pond to include basically an open cesspit for animal manure. It's not described anywhere in a common definition of a farm pond. And actually, I disagree with the prior speaker about this going to attorneys. The reason that we have a zoning board of appeals is to consider the decisions that the zoning board has made. You, the zoning board of appeals, can overturn the decision of the zoning board based on your judgment of what is intended and for the good of this town, and what is really agriculture, and what is a commercial use and a pit for animal waste. And I hope you will exercise your responsibility in that regard. Thank you.
My name's Tracy Wiley, 54 Olivia Drive. I'm going to back off of what she just said. Same thing, have the definition of what a farm pond is, definition of a manure lagoon, also called a waste storage pond, specifically designed to store or treat liquid animal waste used on farms with high numbers of livestock, engineered to prevent seepage into groundwater, the design hopefully, but they use a clay liner. Lots and lots of hazardous things come from it with our drinking water. You've got the Scannic right on the other side. I know that's not what you guys want to know about, but very concerned about this going in my neighborhood. Originally, they had this called as a manure lagoon, and then when everybody had an uproar, they decided to withdraw their application and change the name of it so that they could slide in with no permits or anything like that. Totally against what they're doing. I hope it doesn't go through. I hope that you stop it here and we can move on with our lives. I do have a question that you had mentioned that the manure was 30 and 70% because that's what the corn crops need. Well, if you change the crops, does that mean that the manure percentage will change as well, depending on the crops? So we could have maybe 40% or 35% manure. How does that work? Is this strictly for the corn, which we don't benefit from? It benefits Oak Ridge for their cows. We're not benefiting from any of this. So I strongly oppose this.
Thank you.
Frank Gordon, can you hear me?
Yes.
Frank Gordon, 160 Watchog Road. You guys are really confused over an irrigation ditch. There's one already back there.
Confused out of a lot of things in addition to that, Frank.
Let me help you. There's one already back there. It's 80 yards wide, 140 yards long. It's been back there for 50 years. It's a beautiful thing. They even have a canoe back there. You know? You gotta go back there and take a look at it. Also, too, did you guys know that they're filling in the wetlands? Come on, give me an answer.
I'm not sure. What's your question, Frank?
There's a statement.
Filling in the wetlands.
They're filling in the wetlands.
And what would you like me to do about that personally?
No, did you know that?
No, I do not know that.
It's either yes or no.
That's an issue for the zoning enforcement officer, Frank?
Okay,
Yeah.
well,
they should know.
Yeah.
okay, okay. Can we do something about that? I mean, I'm bringing it to your attention, to whoever, we can do something about that. Okay?
Wetlands.
Joanna Shapiro, our wetlands agent.
There you go.
Okay, so we can do something about that, right? Because they're expanding the fields back there. Okay? Some of the boys got together. We got some questions over here. Okay, I'm going to make a little statement. Cows give out manure. How do we know these cows are healthy? We don't. Pathogens, viruses, parasites. Contaminations of private drinking wells. He did an excellent job with the clay lining. If it cracks, where's the water? He said 3,000 gallons a day. It's a lot of water. The smell, airborne and aerosols. It's going to stink like hell. Groundwater. What about mosquitoes and flies and stuff? My God.
All right, Frank, we're getting a little off topic here, so I'm going to ask you. No,
We're staying on topic.
we understand that.
Okay.
Okay.
You got questions here. Okay. These are questions. Okay. These are serious questions.
I understand that, Frank.
Okay. Has anybody, taken a certain public health risks, floods? Okay. I'm just real quick things. I mean, he covered it. I'm just going over it. Okay. Oh, wait a minute. It would be. Did you guys know that they had 2 rollovers in Ellington? Not recently, but how did they pick up the rollovers? When the trucks rolled over, nobody even thought about that. Oh, here's another thing too.
Frank, no offense. I'm not saying that I'm not concerned about what you're saying, but we're getting way too far off topic. We are concerned here about, is this a farm pond or not? Not about rollovers, Okay, and I'm not disrespecting you in any way. Your concerns are legitimate, but they are not addressing the issue of what we're talking about here.
Okay, we're talking about the manure pond, right? They're going to be using tankers, right? Right?
Correct.
Okay, so they're going to be going up and down the roads, right? Okay, the people going up and down the roads, Watchog, King, Fort Bridges, and Hall Hill, they're going to be driving on these roads, right?
Correct.
They're going to be taking this manure on their tires, underneath their fender walls, and they're going to be driving it right into their garages. How do you like their garages smelling like manure? I don't like it. Okay, I have concerns about this.
I understand that. I've had my own concerns.
Where do you live, anyways?
I live on Wood Road.
Woods Road? I bet you she doesn't live in Summers either.
Well, where do you think Wood Road is, Frank?
I know where Woods Road is.
Don't get the impression that we have to listen to both sides and take all the evidence. You
know, it's very
don't
simple.
think that, yeah.
It's very simple. They've had this manure pond in Ellington for 5 generations. We don't need it here in Summers. We don't need it. You got the Scannick and you got the Watchog. This thing overflows. It goes from the Scannick and the Watchog into Summersville. You know, when I was a kid growing up, I fished the Scannick and the Watchog. And I was coming up the Watchog, and I saw 4 kids on bicycles going into the road fishing. And it brought back a lot of memories. If that gets contaminated, forget it. We don't need this in our town.
You're right, Frank.
We don't need it. It's very simple. Whatever happened to the old days when they had solid manure and a manure spreader?
Right.
We didn't have this problem.
Right. This company, they can stay in Ellington.
Go back to the old days. We didn't have this problem. And another thing, too. Is Bob Traham in the audience? Here's a report. The Oak Ridge boys poisoned his well with another well. He had to get it re-drilled. Did they compensate for him? No. And here's a medical report. He had to get tested in Ellington for hepatitis C and have his well re-drilled. They didn't compensate him. Doctor bills are nothing. It's not fair. It's not fair. You know? It's not a nice thing at all. You know, and then we're going to have a barbecue? And we're going to have to smell this manure? Is the town going to compensate us for the value of our houses? But they're still going to want taxes.
Right, Frank. Yeah, Frank.
Look at the homes up in Candlewood. $500,000, $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 homes. I've lived in this town for years. Years. And you want this in our town? Hell no.
Yeah, Frank.
Thank you.
Yeah, Frank.
Hi, I'm Jude Connick. I live on 32 Maple Ridge Drive. I grew up in Summers. I'm the granddaughter of a farmer from Maine who had a pretty large farm and used to be a regional farmer and take all of the vegetables and potatoes to Faneuil Hall. So, love farms, love farmers. But I think in one respect, it's a little bit of a red herring tonight. Because when I did a little bit of research, Oak Ridge could be doing a hell of a lot more with their manure than sending it to us. My grandfather always used to say, when my cousins, his grandkids, would get into an argument and go to him, he'd go, there are always 3 answers to a problem. Go figure it out and come back and tell me what you decided on. Down East wisdom. And so I decided, well, I need to look for my 3 things. So that's what I did this afternoon. The easiest way to get rid of this problem is to let those poor darling cows out of those metal stalls and let them go out on their pastures and poop out there. So that could take care of a lot of it. This is a very large, wealthy dairy farm. This is the largest in the state of Connecticut. And now they're sending the poop from the animals to South Jersey and making money on that biofuel. It's a huge money-making operation, and we all know as residents that we're fighting against big money here. We know that, and that's why we're so frustrated tonight. The second thing I found is that they could do a compost bedded pack barns. So these are huge barns that they could install in Ellington, and they use straw and wood to absorb the manure, and then they turn it into compost. On top of it, this solution reduces odor, leakage, and greenhouse gases, which is really huge with manure. It is eating away at the ozone layer. And the last one is called bio-drying, and this is to dry the manure, and even using solar panels and solar heat, and moisture gets removed, and then it can be processed and how they would like to process it. There are other solutions to this problem. Why are we talking about manure lagoons when the town of Ellington won't let them have any more? Suffield said no to this, and all of North Carolina are coming up with these solutions so they don't have the following things. I know it's been talked about before, but repetition is good. I'm a teacher, so I know about repetition, especially when we're emotional about stuff. The water contamination is a definite in this. This is clay. This isn't steel. All right, it's a definite. It is definitely going to be contaminating water. And part of that for the harmful chemicals is nitrogen, phosphorus, which leads to algae blooms in other water bodies. And in this case, it would be the Scannic and it would be Watchog. Public health concerns. And I'm concerned about this because I have 2 darling little boys who live on Franklin Woods, pathogens. Lagoon water can contain harmful bacteria, viruses, posing a risk both to wildlife. Can we think about the wildlife too here? We're not the only things that live on this planet. And humans, if there are any breaches or leaks. Odor. Manure, and I live in Maple Ridge Drive, and we get those 2 or 3 days, when they are when they're fertilizing, and it's awful. You don't go outside. Manure lagoons produce strong, unpleasant odors that can affect nearby communities, and also potential health issues like respiratory problems. And I love to call them stepsons, asthma, and so this is not going to be good for them. Animal welfare. Industrial scale livestock operations rely on manure lagoons can be associated with intensive animal farming practices, which often raise ethical questions about animal treatment and factory farming. PETA has been to this establishment. PETA did a whole report on Oak Ridge and about how the animals do not get a chance to go out. When I grew up in this area, they used to have the cows go out into the pastures and eat clover and other kind of things. They don't anymore. They're in this circular, I don't know what they actually refer to it as, but it revolves around. They take, thank you. They take the calves 20 minutes after they're born, and they send them away into these little huts, and then they send them away for another full year for them to grow, and then they impregnate them artificially, unfortunately, and then they bring them back. All right. Critics argue that manure lagoons might be a short-term solution to waste management, but they don't address underlying issues of industrial agriculture's reliance on wasteful systems. There's so many reasons for us not to say yes to this. It's not our responsibility in Summers. We are a farming community. What do we have? We have corn, basically. We have horses. We have tobacco. Okay, we've never been much of a dairy community, and they used to call, I guess, down to Ellington and Summers this Milk Mile. There were all these tiny little dairy farms. They're gone because Oak Ridge has taken all of those tiny little dairies, and they've shut down. So, thank you very much for listening. I appreciate your time, and it is hard to volunteer, and I know the hours that you put into this. I want to thank everybody who came tonight and showed up, because it's hard to do this. But we really think that there's other solutions for this very wealthy establishment to consider, and you don't have to consider saying yes to them. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Kimberly Conlon Quirk. I live at 298 Watchog Road here in Summers, and I grew up at 131 Kibbe Grove Road because nearly 56 years ago, my parents bought their land for $2,500 from Edwin and Bernice Pell of Pell Farm. There is an irrigation pond that abuts my property on Watchog Road. It is used to water Christmas trees. It is used to water strawberries. And it does no harm to my well or to my septic system. The kind of manure lagoon which has been rebranded as an irrigation pond is an entirely different thing. Will the waters from it be used to fertilize crops? Yes. But in the meantime, they will be a holding storage facility for lots of things, including methane, which are defined as toxic. And that's why it was rebranded. Having grown up in that neighborhood as long as I have, I can tell you that the Scantic River and the brook flood frequently. The water table is very high. Even at my corner lot on Watchog and Kibbe Grove, I have a basement system to keep my house from flooding. And I am not at the lowest point in the water table, according to topographical maps. Houses vary in expense in my neighborhood. And to be perfectly honest with you, it's not the expense of the homes that concerns me. What concerns me is that one of the things, other than agriculture, that has made this town so special over its 300-year history is that we have cared for one another. And we have guaranteed that regardless of whether your house is $150,000 or $500,000 or more, you can usually expect that barring some kind of accident, you will be able to draw your own drinking water and you will be able to trust your own septic system. And I want that right to continue for myself. I want it for all my neighbors. And unless you live in my neighborhood and you're willing to sacrifice that right, I don't want you to make decisions for me and my neighbors. Furthermore, we look no further than the neighborhoods closest to our own prison to see when something as simple as the decision of a prison guard to dry clean a uniform can contaminate waters and make it impossible for people to ever use their own wells again. Thank you for your consideration of my feelings, and thank all of you for your contributions to this discussion.
Thank you.
Good evening. Rick Kelly, 24 Carriage Drive, here in Summers. Folks have already shared a variety of perspectives that I co-signed tonight. I have two suggestions. I'm going to jump right to two solutions, one for each party. To the Oak Ridge folks, I empathize. You got to feed your animals. I get it. Okay? You got to grow corn to do that. This seems like a lot of hassle, a lot of trouble, and I genuinely feel bad for you guys. I'll make it simple. We'll buy the land from you. Contact me. Okay? We'll take it off your hands. You take that money, you go buy the land in Ellington, and you keep everything there. We'll take care of that for you. Solution 2, the folks here at the front of the room. The attorneys, believe it or not, as I understood it, said the same thing tonight. They just said it from two different perspectives. And I'll rephrase it, and hopefully this drives home the message and really summarizes this. If there's not any kind of precedent throughout the state, why are we trying to be the first to not define it? If it's not defined, therefore it must be declined. And it's that simple. Thank you.
Good evening. Paul Russell, 5 Cantlewood Drive, Somers, Connecticut. We live right across the street from there. And again, I plead to your provisions that are the general provisions, which is to not change the character of the town, not to change the area that would negatively impact any of the residents surrounding that area. I believe that will severely impact it. Back in 2004, I've been there since 1996. There was some different change of fertilizer that was used. Our houses were covered with flies, maggots, everything for the entire time. I can't imagine that this would be any better, only worse. So again, I plead towards the general provisions of this group that says we will not do anything that will negatively impact citizens or the surrounding public. Thank you.
Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Cheryl Vitale. I'm at 57 Old Farm Road. I've been in Somers for over 40 years. I'm a realtor. I used to do respiratory therapy. I'm familiar with airborne problems. But most of all, I think it's kind of simple. Like we've said, we're so fortunate to have such great people to come here and complain or air how they feel. And I hope that each one of you are keeping in mind what you've heard tonight from every person. 5 things. Give me 5 things that are positive about the agricultural pond. Don't use the word pond. It's way too sweet. Way too sweet. Of the manure container, whatever. But I think it's all realtor. I've been a realtor for almost 30 years. That's important, isn't it? That's your tax base. If you lose X amount of % of houses and the value drops considerably, that's not positive for us. That's not positive for you. That's your tax base. Think about every single person that stood here, like me, probably nervous, talking about all the wonderful issues they brought up. But keep in mind, what are 5 things that are going to help Somers because of this? Do you have you have more than 5? Let me know.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Peter Felix. I live at 50 Carriage Drive. My family's lived.
Can't hear you, sorry.
Peter Felix, 50 Carriage Drive. My family's lived on Carriage Drive since the 70s. As Frank said, back then, when there was fertilization happening, there was no smell like it is now. Now we have this unholy smell. I'm sure you guys are aware of it. Additionally, I'm not sure, as Frank said, why we should allow the exportation from Ellington of effluent to our town, risking our wells. On NBC, I think it was Mr. Mosier, said that they're trying to be a good neighbor. Their tankers are incontinent. They leak. When my wife and I go for a walk, we have to step over the trail of effluent. Is that the right word? I understand the importance of an agricultural community. My grandfather was a dairy herdsman. My great-uncle was a dairy farmer. My dad was a farmer. He put himself through school working on a farm. I put myself through UConn working on a farm. I'm totally down with farming. But they're not good neighbors. I don't think we can trust them. We were in Ellington this past Sunday morning. The smell took our breath away. I don't know how the folks in Ellington put up with them. They're not good neighbors. I think I saw either on the web or maybe it was on the news, that they have a special process to eliminate the smell. I'm not sure if that's the waving of the magic wand. Do somehow they suspend the laws of physics so their manure doesn't smell like everybody else's manure? Give me a break. Now, if I'm not mistaken, because I think I learned it with the landing strip, if something's allowed zoning-wise, it's there forever. So if this is allowed, if Oak Ridge decides to expand their product line into chickens or sheep, is there any limitations on the type of manure? What if it's determined that human waste is good for corn? Will that be allowed? What about the crossover of avian flu into the dairy population? Do we have to worry, as someone said earlier, about mosquitoes biting us? But an interesting point that it seemed very important for their attorney, I'm sorry, I forget your name, that this was not a storage facility. This was not a storage facility. But clearly it is a storage facility. Because if it's not a storage facility, they would truck in their effluent, put it down, and drive away. But they're not. They're not immediately using it. They're storing it.
Right. Using it.
Causing us all the problem. And I did ask the lady who was before me if I had her realtor card, because if this goes through, I'm out.
Hi, my name is Kevin Chabelli. I live on White Birch Circle. It's simple to me. You guys talked about this thing inevitably is going to leak, and it's going to leak a lot. And our big concern is whatever other bacteria are getting into the ground, but a big concern is nitrogen getting into our water supply. We can't dump grass clippings anywhere in the state of Connecticut because when they break down, there's a nitrogen residue. So you're talking about something that, 300 years old. Well, new technology now has told us we can't do this anymore. Call it what you want. You can put lipstick on a pig. It's still a pig. Thank you.
Marilyn Hare, 135 Watchog Road. My family was raised on Georgewood Road, where we were contaminated by prison groundwater from their dry cleaning. I moved to Watchog to get away from water contamination, and now you're bringing it back. My family's grown and moved on, but there are children in the neighborhood, there are seniors in the neighborhood, and we have to be concerned about the groundwater contamination because the water table is so high there.
Right.
And you cannot expect people to give you true answers about water contamination.
Right.
Thank you.
I just want to just say one more thing. We're just talking
State
about...
your name again, please.
Frank Gordon, I'm sorry, 160 Watchog. We're just talking about the field here on Watchog. I failed to mention they have other fields that they're farming in summers. So it's just not the field in Watchog Road. They have other fields on Four Bridges, and if I'm not mistaken, Springfield Road also, I've heard through the grapevine. Whether they bought it or renting it, I'm not sure. So these trucks, these tractor trailers are just not confined just to one area, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, they're all over the place. So be prepared. Residents of Summers, okay? Your cars are going to be stinking.
Oh, my God.
Okay? I may be wrong. I don't know. But this is what I heard. And sometimes these people are not wrong. Because Oak Ridge is a big farming establishment. Okay, I haven't gone to the town hall and dug out records or nothing.
Yeah.
Okay? So I may be wrong.
Thank you.
My name's John Burney. I live at 361 Watchog Road. I'm one of the few full-time farmers left in the state of Connecticut. Farm right down the road from Oak Ridge. And I'm going to give a little different perspective here. The previous speakers have talked about 2-3 days in the spring about the odor and mud on the road and this and that. But let's look at the flip side. They're living across the street from 600 acres of protected farmland, some of the most beautiful land in the state. And yeah, there's a few downsides with that, but look at the upside potential. If you want agriculture to remain viable in the state, you got to work with the farmers. There's a large dairy farmer, produced a lot of manure. One of the things you have to do is you have to get rid of your manure. That's very highly regulated by the state. With different amounts, they're regulated by how much manure they can put down on the acres, and so they're not doing it indiscriminately. So your job as the board is to apply the law. You have to look at the facts and apply the law. Is there an agriculture exemption that this falls under? If there it is, it's your responsibility to uphold the law. So I just wanted to give a little different perspective, and if we want to live in a state where you still have some open land, then you got to work with the farmers.
We do, but we want to be.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Does anybody else have anything to add before we...
Hi, my name's Jill Conklin. I live at 3 School Street, which is right across from the entrance to Hall Hill. I also own a property up on Hall Hill, so as a crow flies, it's probably maybe 4/10 of a mile from my property there. I drive by Oak Ridge every day on my way to drop my daughter off at school and then head to work. We go through that area. We drive down School Street, down Maple, up Penny, across 9th District, Dobbs Hill, all the way into Ellington. And a lot of times we close our windows up when we get to that area because it does smell at certain times of the year. And if they're tracking in and out, those trucks have big open holes. They're open at the top. They're not closed. There is a law in Connecticut. I didn't have time to look it up. But if you're trucking something across the road, you're supposed to keep it contained within the truck. You're not supposed to let it just, fly out and land wherever it wants. But these trucks do spill because I live at School Street with a red light there going across to Hall Hill. When those trucks stop right there on the way up to, Hall Hill Road, wherever they're treating all those farms, they stop and then it's like sloshes back and forth and spills over. It's all spilled over at the back of those trucks if you drive behind them. They would spill over right by my driveway. So I can attest that if you drive through this stuff and you get it up in your wheel wells and you go into your garage, you are going to have, your whole house is going to stink. And you have to go get your car washed and really hose underneath that right away so it doesn't harden on. It smells terrible. About 10 years ago, on Thanksgiving, it was a really warm day, they treated the fields up by Highland View. And, people up there were really angry because here it is Thanksgiving. It was like 70 degrees. They wanted their windows open. They're baking a turkey. They couldn't do that. They had to keep their windows shut from the smell. I don't think this is an accessory use to this farm because it's too big of a massive pit to just water that or irrigate that twice a year. I did read an article where they were looking at expanding into Massachusetts And by this pit, they'd be able to get there quicker without, going all the way back to Ellington. They could move the product to other areas. I think this is more of a industrial manufacturing operation versus an accessory use to just this piece of land where all the development rights have been sold. That's why there isn't anything there. It's used for farming. We have a lot of areas like that in town. But I'm not for this in the area. That whole area of Summers is very wet. All summer long on my property, I have a trickle of water constantly. It can be the driest day, and there's going to be a lot of water. It's very wet there. The aquifer, there's a huge aquifer up there. If, we're all on wells, I would say get your water tested now, have a baseline, because if things change, you're going to want to know. You're going to want to know. We already had the mink farm with problems up there, right?
Right.
We had there's something else I can't remember. Arsenic, yeah. So, I love the well water I have on Hall Hill Road. I love to drink it. I want to enjoy that. I live here. I've been in this town for 40 years. By trade, I'm a real estate broker. I know values of property. I know what affects properties. This would affect property. The area out in Ellington, Hoffman Road, I always knew, you go sell a house over there, you got to tell the people, you got to go back a few times because there's going to be a smell. And I don't want to not disclose that. It's a material fact to the area, and this would be a material fact to our area. We would have to, people would move. I mean, the smell, when it drops off in front of my office on School Street, it would make my eyes burn. I don't know what's in it. It can't be just manure and water, because that stuff is really, really potent. So I don't really have too much else to say, but I hope this doesn't go through for the sake of the town and our water. Oh, that's it. Have a good day.
Hi, I'm Laurie Coombe, 27 High Meadows Crossing. I think you could do what probably everybody in this room did and go online and look up manure lagoons. And I'm not talking about just Google it, but go to these different states that have councils and they talk about it. And one of the things they stress is that you have to have a gauge, and it has to be monitored all the time to make sure that it's not close to the top, because a rain could just put it right over that berm, and that happens a lot with high winds and high rains. It also says the process of anaerobic digestion has been shown to release over 400 volatile compounds from lagoons. Most prevalent, ammonia, hydrogen sulfide, methane, and carbon dioxide. And a study by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency found that concentrations of hydrogen sulfide near lagoons has exceeded their state standard even as far away as 4.9 miles. So, from where that's located, the people in Massachusetts don't even know that they could be affected by the wind going from south to north. And I've only lived here for 2 years, so I'm not real big on knowing about farming, but I've started to learn a lot as a result of what's going on here tonight. So just hoping. Our attorney didn't sound like he, I don't know, it sort of sounded to me like he might be changing his mind. So maybe you could all talk and come up with a plan and hopefully keep this from coming to our town. I love Summers. It's beautiful here. We left a place where there was wall-to-wall traffic, and it's wide open and gorgeous, and I'd like to keep it that way.
Thank you. Any more public comment? Any further questions from the board? Do you have anything to add?
assume I do a rebuttal at this point?
Be my guest.
No. Supervisor?
I have no response to what we heard.
Dwight Merriam speaking again. I'm sorry, Carl Landolina and Jen Roy, about your concern that I had somehow extracted certain emails to make a point. I didn't. I have the email here from Carl Landolina in response to mine. And I said, and I asked him, and I'll submit it to the record, but, excuse me?
I think we're good with the email chain.
All right. Well, I just wanted to say that I just copied and pasted in the email he sent to me, which was the string of messages.
Very good, thank you.
And I apologize if it appears that I was engineering something out of that. I wasn't. Fertilizer, Carl Landolina suggests that this is just like any other fertilizer. It's not. It's not a dry product. You can't store it in a warehouse like that. So that analogy I don't think works. It's apparent that they didn't know when they were reviewing this that NRCS states that even a clay liner in a, quote, ideal situation will leak. Maybe that would have made a difference to them. I don't know. Carl Landolina does mention, as I did, and Attorney Reiser, I think, reflected on, I'll get to her in a moment, that the regulations are permissive regulations. It has to expressly allow something in order to have them. He mentioned, Attorney Reiser also mentioned, although I didn't, but I will now, the protection of private property rights. Because the other side of that coin is that there are a substantial number of private property owners who are potentially adversely affected by a decision. Now, finally, as to Oak Ridge's testimony and argument. Number one, the digestate is a concentrated product. If you read about it in any depth, it's not. It has a high level of ammonia. It is concentrated. It's a digestate. It's reduced in volume from what comes out of their system. So don't misunderstand it as anything other than that. Second, unrelated to that, of course, is that Attorney Reiser ends up arguing, if you heard her, I did, the town's definition of agriculture reflects part of 1-1Q, the statutes, but doesn't adopt it expressly in its entirety, and references it could be amended from time to time. And the only mention of anything that's close to this project is reservoir. I think it's very hard to get to the point where a reservoir. Now, the pond has been kicked around. We've talked about that. But the only word in the zoning ordinance that comes close to this is reservoir. And we would respectfully suggest that you cannot make that connection. This is not, two last points. I wish I could talk about my own family's history of dairy farming, but I won't. I'll just say this. I said earlier, we're supportive of farming. 120 Watchog Road is owned by farmers, and there's no reason why the 360 rain system can't be installed, but in order to make it safe and appropriate for the neighborhood, I would amend the zoning regulations to expressly provide how it would be approved, and I would have it, and I've researched, I didn't bother to put it in this presentation, the tanks that are available for digestate. And that would control the air quality issues. The steel tanks and concrete tanks, for the most part, do not leak. It's certainly not clay. And they can have installed underneath them, and they do, detection devices to determine if there is any compromise with the tank. It costs more than an open pit. And you don't get to sell all the sand and gravel that you dig out of the pit. But if they need to put the digestate there, here, in Summers, they can do it. If you find that an open manure lagoon of this scale is not a permitted use in town. I'll end with this. When I step back from this, the thing that worries me the most is the precedent you would create by finding that this is a, quote, agricultural use. Because as I said earlier, you'll get another manure lagoon and another, and maybe a big feedlot and a cattle auction, and any number of things that could be tied to the term agriculture. You need to look at the definition. The only thing in the definition is, as I said, reservoir. But the danger of precedent here for this town goes far beyond this one manure lagoon. And with that, I would commend to your favorable attention and finding that a manure lagoon of this scale is not a permitted use anywhere in the town of Somers. Thank you.
Again, Derek Donnelly for the appellant as well. And I just wanted to add a couple of points because you heard from Oak Ridge's attorney that, look, if you need to approve this, all you have to do is say this is accessory agricultural use and that's it. It's in. Okay? Once again, if it's not expressly permitted, it's prohibited. That's point number one. Point number two is even if it's agricultural use, it still falls under your regulations where your regulations apply. And again, we had a very good question about the manure storage over 16 yards. As Judge Berger points out in his opinion, the regulation doesn't say solid manure storage. It doesn't say liquid manure storage. It says manure storage. If you're looking for a reason to deny this or to uphold the appeal, you can look right to that regulation. It's over 16 cubic yards, period. Okay? The other thing is about that came up from your question earlier about the earthwork regulations. And once again, those regulations say that any other state or municipal permits required for such activity have been issued before the zoning enforcement officer can allow it. Okay? The first question to Oak Ridge should have been, are there any other state permits required, and have those been approved? And what you heard tonight is we're talking to DEEP. Not that they've got those permits, not that they've been approved. This should have been a non-starter right there from the start. So you have within your regulations multiple reasons to uphold the appeal and would just ask you to do so and for all the reasons you heard tonight.
Thank you. Anything from you, Joy?
I guess the only thing, thank you, that I would like to respond to is with that last comment from Attorney Donnelly was other permits would be required prior to the issuance of a zoning permit. And I would again call to your attention that the zoning regulations permit agriculture as of right without a zoning permit. So I don't believe that that section applies in its entirety to this operation. I would just reiterate that I think the sole question before you is, do you deem what you heard tonight to be agriculture? And I think that's a fairly straightforward consideration, and we had to listen to a lot of concerns in order to get there, but the decision is yours at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Any questions from the board?
Just a question for Mike later, but I assume we can do that within our discussion.
We can do that. All right, can I have a motion to end the public hearing and move into a discussion and possible decision? A motion by Sean, second by Doug. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Motion passes unanimously.
Get out of here. I can use a scotch.
Where do we want to go on this board? Do you want to go tonight?
Yeah, well, I think we have all the facts we need to go tonight. Plus, I go to sea in about a week, and I'm gone for 2 months, so it's down to you guys.
Can I please get a motion to approve the appeal of ZBA 25-002 as stated in the legal notice?
So moved.
Moved by Andy Rocket, seconded by Doug Sevens, excuse me. Discussion?
That was to approve the appeal, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So approval of the appeal will be in favor of 120 Watchog Road, and denial of the appeal will be in favor of the zoning enforcement officer.
Okay, can I ask Mike a question now?
Absolutely.
Do you think it's a manure storage facility?
Do I think so? First thing I want to say is, whatever decision you make, I'm going to be in the position of likely having to defend you in court. So my concern is, if I tell you what I think, it might make it more difficult for me to defend you in court. I think this is a very tricky question, but one thing I can say is that when I look at the appeal itself says it's not a farm pond, it is a manure storage facility. So the appeal itself claims this to be a manure storage facility. There is case law that suggests that, well, not doesn't suggest, it says that when an appeal is filed, what the person facing the appeal is expected to contest is what the appeal says. So there seems to be an acceptance in the appeal that it's a manure storage facility. Now, I know that Attorney Merriam talked about it as being a manure lagoon, but I do have to agree with those people on both sides that have said this is something of a question of semantics. The question really, I think, boils down to a couple of things. One, as Attorney Reiser and Attorney Merriam agree, the main question is this an agricultural use? Do you view this as an agricultural use? Secondly, if it is an agricultural use, is that the end of the question? Or do you have to go further than that? I think you have to go further than that. And I say that because if you look at manure storage in the regulations, manure storage, I'm trying to pull it up right now, manure storage is referred to as an accessory use to agriculture. So the regulations themselves indicate that not every agricultural accessory use is allowed as of right. Manure storage is not. If it's an agricultural accessory use, that requires a special use permit. By the same token, I disagree that there is an exemption for agricultural uses for excavation. Just as this regulation about manure storage, making it a special use permit, means that it's not allowed as of right, even though it is recognized as an agricultural use.
But Mike, that issue is not before us, is it?
What's that?
That issue is not before us.
Which issue?
The excavation aspect.
That's why I was asking the question about what was approved, because the entire operation was approved by this approval. But that's what I was looking at. The excavation was described in the application materials, and there was a statement in the application materials that the material was going to be trucked off-site. That was approved by this application. So the question of whether or not the approval should have been given should include that use as well. Was that appropriate? It was an issue that has been raised and discussed by both sides without anybody questioning it. So I think it's properly before the board at this point. And I think that does deserve some consideration. But the point I'm trying to make with it is, I think that runs parallel to the agricultural use exemption. You have a general exemption for agricultural uses, but it doesn't mean that other regulations can apply. In my opinion, the manure storage is one of those regulations, additional regulations that applies. The excavation regulation is the same thing, because the excavation regulation, again, specifically mentions agriculture as a permissive exemption to the excavation regulations, but only under certain conditions. So I think the board, because that excavation was implicitly approved by this approval, and it's been discussed, I think the board does have the right and the necessity to consider it under these circumstances.
I ask a simple question. Okay. Anyway,
maybe I didn't understand your simple question.
Yeah, you did. All right, so I guess a couple comments. My first comment is, I really do regret, and I'm chagrined by references to our neighbor town as Smellington and all the derogatory comments about that. And I feel ashamed that this town that I love so much talks about a neighboring town that way. You know what I mean? Makes it hard to defend when they slam on Summers, and I hate it when people slam on Summers. The next is, you guys know this, so I don't have to tell you this, but we don't have the luxury of deciding whether we would want it there, right? We have to decide based on the zoning regulations and the law, right? That's what we have to go by. I understand Landolina's decision perfectly. I think he did a great job. I concur with Attorney Reiser's view that this is an agricultural use of this. It was a very, very good defense, I thought, of their motion. To me, the issue is not so much whether this is a farm pond, but whether or not it was a manure storage facility. That's the issue. And I looked at that regulation, the 3.C5D, and to me, it says manure storage. It doesn't say dry manure storage or fresh from the cow manure storage. It just says manure storage. And as I think it was Attorney Donnelly pointed out, and I talked a little bit with the farmer's attorney, they can't tell you how much manure is in there, right? And with a pond that size, my own quick calculation shows it would have to be less than 0.14% manure to fall below the 16-yard special use permit requirement in the regs, right? It's got, in my mind, while I don't know, it's got to have more than that, for a pond that size. So what I would do is I would vote to support the application and advise, or not advise, but allow them, or not even, or just, I'd approve it, and then hopefully they would go back to the zoning board for a special use permit, where a comprehensive review of everything can take place, safeguards can put in place, and I would expect they'll get it, But that's, I guess that's my comment.
No, you said the application means support the appeal.
I would support the appeal, yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that.
If I can give a simple answer.
I'm sorry, he had said he would support the appeal.
Okay.
Yes.
And if I can give
For the
a
reasons
simple
he
answer, I
stated.
would say I think that's a very supportable decision.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay.
I would have to say, Andy, from my perspective, you put much more gracefully how I felt. So I feel the same way. I do concur. Any other discussion?
I'll just go on record and say that I support. I thought it was well articulated. I think it's hard, given the information that's been presented to us, to not consider this as a storage facility of sorts. I think, as was shared with us, manure is only spread 2 times per year, or the contents of the field spread 2 times a year. The balance is that whatever's there is being stored, while the 2 times a year it's not being spread. And follow that calculation, as I think Attorney Merriam presented in this as well. I think the timing alone, and again, fairly new to this commission, and want to make sure that we have the facts right. There's a legal component of this, and there's zoning regulations, and there's a bit of common sense baked in there. When I go back to the timeline of events, the email from Bree was on the 25th of March, which clearly states that the sand from this manure lagoon was going to be moved from the property. But on the 31st of March, just 6 days later, the decision was rendered approved. So the facts that we had before us, or the zoning enforcement officer had before her, clearly said that material was going to be removed, yet decision was still rendered to be approved, which is not in alignment with the zoning regulations, or one of the zoning regulations around earthwork that are there. I'm just referring to my notes. So, plenty of notes. Appreciate the discussion tonight, and likewise, I am in support of the appeal that's been presented to us this evening.
Any further discussion? Ralph?
I'm torn. I very much agree with Attorney Reiser's point about support, about the legislation that exists allowing agriculture as a right. I also do not have a problem, forgive me, world, with a manure lagoon, as we're going to call it tonight, per se. I abut one of the fields that you currently fertilize routinely. As I said earlier, my best prediction of when there's going to be rain is when I see your trucks starting to go up that afternoon. And I actually prefer the way it is right now because you do it before it rains. It only smells for a day. But I do agree that even with the stipulation, which Attorney Reiser indicated and Bree Hyde seemed to indicate, they would have that any excavated material would remain on the property. I do think that the one element of the zoning regulations that deals with the manure storage should be addressed by the zoning commission. Ironically, I think that it's there more for people who keep horses than for people who run large dairy farms. So I will vote to support the appeal, only in the notion that it should be the beginning of an ongoing conversation with the zoning commission to come up with provisions that will address some of the concerns you heard tonight satisfactorily, and frankly to make our own regulations both clearer and more farm friendly. That's all I have to say.
Any further discussion?
Sorry, Frank. I'm done with that part.
I can't say nothing?
Unfortunately not.
Huh?
Unfortunately not.
Oh, can I say something later?
After we finish the meeting.
After the meeting?
I'm not guaranteeing anybody's going to listen, but
I'll listen, Frank.
I'm just joking. All right, any further discussion? All in favor? All right. All opposed? Abstained? Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the board.
Look at those please. Excuse me. Ladies and gentlemen, we still have a little bit of business to conduct, so if you could flip it down, please.
You know, adjourn for 5 minutes, let it clear out.
Yeah, we'll do a 5-minute adjournment.
Thank you so
I got more gray hair, so not too many years of you. Next time I had a coffee I want the motion made online from the whole meeting's online. We were in Phoenix City, I'm always drinking before I go on vacation. Oh, you can't go vacation. Break down the individual. Nice job. All 5. Yes.
And I'm like texting everybody that was here that had to leave. I kept looking up there and saying, well, there was 1,400 rocks flying by my house every day. They didn't see anybody speak all the time. And I was like, well, man, I should have been here on 6 o'clock in the morning. I just sat there. I just sit and watched them. Cameras went
Technically, they're in content insurance. It's expecting to
I believe I precedent.
Okay. Actually, we lived down here. We just moved here. Somebody on Castlewood also had a rich back and there were piles of chicken shit down there. We never smelled it. And then they used to spread it. So many trucks now. I was counting. I saw counted one day. These 6 trucks every night. We had to like tell kids like not to send the school bus. I was like, Sarah, you see how nice they are to do that person on the street. Go past my flight. Like I wanted to say something that's not I'm not sure. Like, dude, some trucks are going around. And it's not even I teach them when I'm around like my son that was everything's out. Yeah, I mean, so Jay, you probably get that He's getting old too. We all can see you.
If you can't sell the house for that's freaking in October. I got a house just like the month before for like that's big change. And that's the market. I've seen earlier. Like 3 days right now. I'll be some of the information.
Anybody coming on Thursday? All right, so haven't got the meeting Thursday. So Jim actually, today's Wednesday. We had letters about my it started over. So, like, we were on different roads. I don't know if Patrick did, but so just about seeing trucks coming to the street and then, either making the street a cul-de-sac. What's wrong with that? And the other edge. Watch out, carriage.
So we need your help put a barrier in place so we can only go off one way.
So we're trying to get signs of these things that we really facility patrols can't set up. But then we can call it, but then you can call the police and say, listen, this is a new throughway, they have to use this. And
There's no chance they might, or they might, I mean, they sometimes do.
Remember with this little Debbie. Let's finish up. Yeah.
No, it's only 10 of me, but I'm going to go.
He knows what's happening for the last 3 hours. He's safe at sea.
Yeah.
All right, we ready? We only have a couple of things here. Minutes, can I have a motion to approve the minutes from April 1st?
That's from April 1st.
Motion by Sean, seconded by Doug. Any corrections, additions, deletions? All in favor? Aye. Opposed, abstained. Motion passes unanimously. Before we adjourn, any comment from?
No, I just wanted to explain. I did actually have a situation. I rendered an opinion to the zoning commission, and they went against it. And somebody took an appeal, and I had to go to court and defend the appeal, even though they had voted against the position that I had taken. And ironically, I won. So the attorney that gave that opinion was wrong.
To beat the red lobe or vice versa.
All I said, I thought, to me, there were several ways you could go on this, all of them being legitimate. I mean, I thought you could look at that and say, it's not what the zoning commission had in mind as a manure storage facility, so it's not.
But we don't have legislative history.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah, we have to be textualists.
Right.
Okay, why don't we do an adjournment first? You can have a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right. Motion by Sean, second by Doug. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Adjourned at, what time is it? The clock is the same time.
9:48.
9:48.
Twice I looked over.
I'm looking, I'm like, oh, we're going, wow. I'm looking after about the